You on?
Go ahead.
Okay.
You have a call.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's 2:35 on January 23rd, 2017. It's our first meeting of the year. We have a quorum present. I hope everybody had a wonderful holiday season, and good to see everybody back. So we're going to start our meeting with the approval. We have a lot of minutes to approve. So, Lisa, do you want to go through them and we'll take one at a time?
Sure.
Let's do that one at a time. The rest of them we can do as a group. So the one...
well, you have them in order, Lisa?
I have it in order.
Okay.
Oh, you have it in order? Okay.
You want to do that?
No, you're fine.
December 7, 2016. Minute.
Is there a motion to approve?
I move we approve as amended.
Yeah.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that's unanimous.
November 8, 2016.
Well, actually, we have the December 7th, which are when you met as Board of Canvassers.
December 7, Board of
There
Canvassers.
was no edits or changes submitted with those.
Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
I move.
Second?
Didn't we just do December 7th?
No, we did the board meeting, not the board canvassers meeting.
Okay.
That was true.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve the
I
Board of
move.
Canvassers on
I
the
move
board?
we accept.
Second?
Yeah.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
And did you move it as amended?
There
Yes,
were
as a
there
board.
were-
All right.
There were no amendments to
Amendments
that.
on that one? Okay.
All those in favor?
Aye.
No one opposed?
Now the rest of them we can move as a group because I don't see any correction on that.
There were corrections on the
On the
November
November
8th.
8th.
November 8?
Great.
Now let's do November 8th
Hold on.
as amended.
Oh, yes. Okay, I move we accept the November 8 as amended.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
No one opposed?
So, the one for the rest of them, we can move.
So now we have the
other-
3 sets of canvas minutes.
Yeah,
You want to put the dates on the record?
I didn't have anything.
Sure, that's the absentee 1, provisional canvas, and absentee 2.
I move we accept all these 3 minutes.
The 3 canvas minutes?
Three
There's a
canvas
motion to
minutes.
approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
No one opposed? Okay. On the agenda, because we have some visitors from Tacoma Park, what I would like to do is move up right after public comments the agenda item under old business Tacoma Park, so that our guests don't have to sit through our exciting meeting. So, are there any public comments, Lisa?
No one has asked to speak in advance. We have no one who signed up.
Okay. Is there anybody that does want to talk from Tacoma? Okay. All right. Let's go to the Tacoma Park agenda item. And Margaret, can you refresh us and get us up to speed as to what we discussed and where we left it off?
Okay. Basically, legislation passed.
Well, we have some visitors from Tacoma
Oh,
Park.
I'm sorry. Yes, we do have visitors from
Let's
Tacoma
introduce
Park.
you. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. Hello. We're expecting another person, but could...
Oh, you want us to wait?
No, I don't think you don't need to.
Jim, she can have a seat here.
Yeah, why don't you come on up? And there's another gentleman from Tacoma Park from the Board of Elections. Come on up, join us. Good seeing you.
We have an individual from the board, Arthur David Olson.
Welcome,
who
Arthur.
is- And then we have the clerk of the city, Jesse Carpenter.
Hi, welcome.
And there may be a council member coming.
I think Councilmember Peter Kovar is on his way.
Well,
It's a little
Okay.
delayed.
should we wait? I mean, as a courtesy?
It would be. It might actually. Maybe you should wait.
Okay,
Okay, then,
we
yeah.
can wait when he gets here.
It's just photo.
Jim, as a housekeeping measure, did the board act on the executive session minutes that were
No, but we
No,
should.
we didn't.
good? And there were only minor changes. David submitted two
Yes.
minor changes. So,
Right.
does the board wish to vote on that?
Yes.
Yes,
In the
I
interim?
move we accept the executive meeting as amended by David, right? Yeah, do that. Okay.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion?
Just for the record, what date is that? That's November...
October 17th?
October 17th?
Wait.
Sorry.
No, it
No,
was
it was December.
December
December 7th.
December
It was
7th.
December 7th. It was,
Yes,
it was the
December
meeting
7th.
held after the Board of Canvassers
Correct.
meeting.
Right.
Okay, so was there a second?
I second it.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Welcome, Jackie.
Thank you.
That passes unanimous. Okay, so,
Was there a second set of executive session?
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
It was one set.
I thought it was a
Oh, you
long.
want
It was
One
just
set.
one.
One set.
Okay, if
Okay.
you are not discussing that, you can go on. You say thank you.
all right, so, let's go to Margaret's reports.
Okay. Temporary personnel. Many of the temporary personnel were terminated in mid-December of last year. Staffing for post-election maintenance of the voting equipment is expected for another 10 weeks in the warehouse area. The Voting Services Division will terminate the last of their temporaries next week. There will be some outreach events that will be covered by temporaries when and if the permanent staff are unable to adjust their schedule.
May I interrupt you at that point, please? I had a question about that. Outreach events.
Yeah.
Why are they not? I mean, I wouldn't imagine we have a great deal because we're not in an election cycle right now. Why would they not be covered by the regular staff?
Generally, they would be, but there's always the possibility that there might be 2 or 3 events running on the same day. I can't think of, in the springtime, like in May, sometimes there are events that are running simultaneously. Generally speaking, I have told the staff that there is no overtime and there is no overtime, and that they are to adjust their schedule to make any outreach events.
So these are not temporary people that we're keeping on board. They would just be brought in if needed?
Yes, these are temporary individuals that are going to remain on our books. We're not going to officially terminate them. All we're going to do is if there is an event and Humberto changes his schedule, but then it's a significant event and we think we can not only recruit election judges but run some good voter registration events. Maybe there's a naturalization ceremony on a Saturday that would sometimes that would be an example. And we have a church event, maybe the festival of strawberries simultaneously. Then those individuals that are part of is on the inactive outreach would be brought back to help us cover that event.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Then county website, the county changed the template for the county website, and that also caused the board's website to be impacted and converted after the election. So it's going to, the Board of Elections website is required to conform with the new county template. We've been making changes on the tabs. You will note that there's a board tab now, and then there's also the board information is also on the drop-down box.
I actually went on to take a look at it, and I thought it looked very good. It seemed easy to follow and move in, and I actually did see more information on there in different categories. So
Yeah, so we are continuing to work on that, and Janet has completely taken the IT, taken over the county website, and she's delegating several of her staff to take the training, as well as Margie, so all the board information can be kept up to date. And that's pretty much, and then finally, Mercedes, last name? Pion. Resigned and has taken another job in another state. And we sent her position over to Human Resources. She is our bilingual staff person up front. We still have 2 people up there that are bilingual in English and Spanish, and we will be working to fill that position in the office as an office services clerical position, who will be bilingual in English and Spanish and assigned specifically to voter services. So, going on to the budget. Margie?
Okay, I did get final information this morning, and sending around the latest spreadsheet. I apologize again for not being able to get this to you in advance. I know you don't have a lot of time right now to look at it. Certainly be happy to answer any questions now, and certainly if you have any in the days ahead after you have a chance to look at it, please send me an email and I'll reply to the full board so that everybody has benefit of any information you're looking for.
Is there anything of note that you...
No, I mean, I think what we're still waiting for the second invoice from the State Board of Elections. We typically would get that late January, early February. I think once we see that, we'll see a big drop in the budget numbers. And once I see that, Margaret and I will be better able to estimate what we're going to be looking at from the state board line items for the rest of the fiscal year, because most of the election expenses should be included in that second invoice. So that'll give us a better feel for what the picture is for the rest of the year. So we're just waiting for that at this point. We are over budget in overtime, which is no surprise. We are all the time. They don't provide us with the funding that we ask for. However, I will say, and I didn't bring it in with me, when you're looking at that year-to-date overtime figure, it is very consistent with what we've spent in every election year. So it's not that we're overspending. We're spending the way we historically spend based on what we have to do and the resources we have to do it with.
Am I correct in what I heard from Margaret, that number will not increase as of this time? There will be no overtime.
Yes, although I think to be fair, that is certainly the goal, and Margaret watches that throughout the year very carefully. There is a remote possibility something might happen that would incur a few hours of overtime from the staff member. You're not going to see any significant increase to that number. It should remain fairly close to that for the rest of the fiscal year.
Okay, voter registration. The purge of the inactive voters from the Montgomery County voter list and canceled was approximately 14,102 voters, and that occurred in January. Staffing registration and absentee are processing the backlog of registrations, and will also begin the data entry of the boxes of sample ballots that were returned for non-delivery. The other project is the ERIC. ERIC is the nonprofit multi-state project designed to improve the integrity of the voter rolls. It's an ongoing program of data sharing of the voter rolls from 21 other states.
Margaret.
Every other month, data gathered through the ERIC project is provided to the local boards of elections so we can update the voter list.
Because we are hooked on to a multi-state thing, like ERIC, are we more likely to be hacked and some of our things, some of our roles perhaps changed or altered?
No, ERIC is a separate entity. It's not part of the state of Maryland. What they do is that list is, well, actually, I'm going to let Allison, because Allison may be a little bit more familiar with it because of her work with Pew.
Well, it's not. We're not getting some feed that's automatically getting, overwriting anything in the voter registration.
How do we get our information from them, on paper or electronically?
We get it electronically, but then we touch and feel it. Jessica, do you want to elaborate a little bit more to Jackie's question?
So what happens is the state, actually, each state, like Maryland, the state board does a poll and sends it off to ERIC, and all the member states do the same thing. They do the compiling, and they use other database sources too, like NBA data, and they do a comparison. And when there's matches of that comparative data, they send it back to the state of Maryland electronically.
So everything's done electronically, so it can be hacked.
By spreadsheet, though. So they are using...
It's not loaded into MD voters. It's not loaded into MD voters until the state of Maryland has an opportunity to go through the data. Because things happen like Justice Roberts will show up as a person who, in the ERIC process, should probably be a registered voter. Because he is a registered voter in this county. But he's a confidential voter. So, and we've had problems with that in the past, where you have just these strange anomalies. And so what they do is they go through this information and sort it and sort out all the anomalies, and then that data is then loaded into MD Voters. Nothing is electronically fed directly into MD Voters at this time.
What do you mean at this time?
Well, they've created a module that is just an upload process. So basically, the state does an export out. So no other outside entity has any access to our voter registration system. The data that they export out is then sent securely to the ERIC administrators who oversee the database, their own, of just the information that the state sent them. And then after it's matched, it's sent back to us, and then the state, using their access to the system, loads it back to the ERIC module.
I thank you for the explanation of how it works. I still don't understand how all of that wonderful stuff you just said keeps us from being hacked from the outside through ERIC.
So the concern is the actual hacking of the data that's exported out. Everything's shaved off. That's like they only
There are
use the last-
firewalls between it all?
No, but they use like the last four of the social security number. But MD Voters doesn't allow the full number to be exported. So different pieces of information, if somebody did get it, most of it's publicly available information from that point. So there is no end to our database for anybody to get to as far as hacking. But
So we send Jackie Phillips voter registration information off to Eric, or certain
We don't
fields
let
from
your
it, your
individual
address
into-
information, and they take a look at the data they got from other states, and they tell us whether or not they found a match
I
with somebody
understand
that
how
looks like
that
the same
works.
person in
I'm
Virginia.
talking about the firewalls so
Right.
that other people can't get into ERIC and get into us through that.
Eric
We're
is
not
not
connected.
consistently connected to the internet.
Not consistently.
All the time.
but it-
It's
Eric, but
only-
then when we get that information back, then that information is given to Jessica's staff who need to eyeball it.
Well, we actually physically go through a paper spreadsheet and process a change in our voter
Thank you.
registration system. But we don't let them connect to our system.
Thank you.
Jackie, if it's
Janet,
all the
would
time
you
in
like
the
to add?
internet, it's easier to hack. But this one, since it's not all the time in the internet,
Wow.
maybe, I'm not saying
told
that.
that's not completely accurate.
Okay.
Thank you. I needed to ask the question.
All right. Sorry. Also, besides the ERIC project, which definitely is a process that helps us keep the lists pretty clean in terms of removing duplicates and that are especially located in other states. Provisional voter data from the election is also updated and integrated into the Maryland voter registration system. That's it for voter registration now.
The 14,000 figure up there, that's the number of people that have been eliminated.
Yes, they were
Already.
removed. They have, we did the green card mailing, the mailing where we sent them a sample ballot, or sent them a voter notification form. It came back twice to this office. We documented it in the MD voter system. Then we turned around and mailed a separate postcard twice after each of the sample ballots had come back, and the individual has not voted in at least 2 federal elections, federal general elections. So, and in many instances, it can be up to the 3rd federal election. So those are the 14,000 people that were removed from the voter files. Okay, I'm just going to go through this real fast because I think this. Are you councilman Peter? Okay, just get through this real quick. State Board of Elections. Focus is basically on the technical aspects of the last election. They've been working with all of the local boards to gather information related to the election audit, as well as the polling place evaluations, the multiple voter reports, the canvass minutes, to complete the election process at the state level. The staff is following the Maryland legislative session. Technology Services has established new security protocols which will require all the local board staff to have access to MD voters to take the state computer security classes online. besides the ones that the county requires all employees to take. New modules in training to return the UOCAVA or the military overseas voter duties to the local boards of election will soon take place, though we will still have one statewide address, as I understand it. And then the new software for the candidate filings is to be implemented. Trading will commence at the beginning of February for all the local boards of elections. And filing date, just in case anybody wants to, is February 28th, 2017. So,
I have,
You mean 2018?
no, the filing begins
Oh, the filing begins.
February
Okay,
28th,
okay, okay.
2017.
Got it.
Margaret, I would say at least 4 or 5 people have called me that are thinking about running in 2018.
They should talk to Chris Zizit
Well,
or the state board.
what they want to know is, when is that, the new county law going into effect?
They
In
should
terms of
we
the
talk to
contributions,
Chris.
the...
Talk to Chris Zizit. She will connect them to the finance department. It's a whole separate. We do not have anything to do with that that portion of the law.
The public financing.
That's correct.
Okay, so good.
And Jim, to answer your question, I was just speaking with the finance office, and they are putting together their information and basically some questions, frequently asked questions, that should be finished by the end of this month, January. So that will be up on their website, and that will be one way for people to access that information.
So it's not us, it's the Department of Finance.
You know, actually, Jim,
And the
my
state.
understanding is really the state board is going to administer it, and that the
Even
county's
the local
actually
elections?
the county's going to fund it, but it's going to go through the state board. So Jared Damaris is probably going to end up being the point of contact for all of that.
Oh, okay.
although he doesn't think so.
Finally,
And, I have a couple questions.
let me get this one thing out, and I'll knock it out real
All right.
fast. The state leased equipment has, as of this afternoon, has all been picked up. The extra equipment that we borrowed or leased, we leased for the November election was picked up by ES&S and removed. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Going up to the third bullet there, talking about the new security classes, wasn't clear to me what was meant by includes the local boards of elections. Does that us as board
Yes.
members?
Oh, no, because you don't have access to MD voters. You do not have access to Maryland. You don't have you are not assigned a Maryland.gov email address
The
to
local
have
board of
access
elections employees.
Okay.
It's a requirement that's being imposed on state employees, but because we're users of state systems, it's also being imposed on us. So we have both the county and the state requirements to comply with.
I sort of assumed that, but it...
Thank you for answering that. I wondered the same thing when I read it.
Then the next thing concerns me. This is our favorite, the UOCAVA, and that's very nice that they're going to return. I take it that means the counting, but the fact that the address is going to go to the state. Seems to me that we're likely to get into the same difficulty we did this time, which is our getting the actual ballots.
Well, in 2014, it was a statewide address, and we did not have these problems because they were not taking, like this year, they were taking everything apart, which made everything crazy. So that's federal law.
Yeah, there needs to be a single point of contact.
That it needs to be mailed to.
Every state has to have a single point of contact.
Jessica has her hand
up. But nothing's going to be opened. I mean, is this anything that we need to look to legislation? Is sort of what's in the back of my mind, or has this been remedied?
Oh, I would think that after what they went through, it would be remedied. Jessica, do you want to weigh in? Because
Yeah.
you know a little bit more about this.
My position too was the single point of contact really comes to the requesting of the ballot, but we, through the run back process, as much as we depend on that, can still have the return envelope once we reach the voter come back to us. So the single point of contact piece really is a voter requesting an absentee. And they'll forward those on to us for processing. A lot of them are electronically done because of voters being, so it'll be through the electronic registration system. But the single point really, in the single address, really means for that initial, so the military doesn't have to try to find the local county. Maryland has a few less counties than some other states. Some have hundreds, so that's why they wanted to make it easier for them not to figure out where to request a ballot from. But we will still furnish through Runback a return envelope back to our local board.
Again, Runback though is the contract's up,
Right.
and now we don't know if that's
Well, or
going.
whoever
But this is only speaking to the outgoing process, not the incoming.
Right.
That's correct. And it's going to be a process that we're going to have to monitor and keep the board apprised of all throughout the process.
Well, again, and maybe when the next item is legislation, I mean, is that an area that could be cleaned up, so to speak, and defined a little better with legislation, or no?
I don't even know that you need legislation. I think probably just the regulations that the state board implements would address it. I mean, if the single point of contact is the state board, but everything gets returned to the local boards, that would seem to be the most logical way to do it, and I would think the state board would welcome that process because it takes them out of the middle of that. But this is, I guess, going back to the old way of doing things, and they're going to look at it and see how it should be implemented going forward.
And I'd say maybe the only thing, to readdress is if we found that there was still a lag in them getting even the request to us. That may be a point that we want to keep an eye on. As long as they're getting them to us timely.
Thank you.
Do we want to?
Yeah, that's why I was just going to ask you.
Yeah, let's welcome back our guest from Tacoma Park, Councilman. Why don't you guys come up? Good seeing you. Weather's bad, isn't it?
Well, I'm Peter Kovar on the City Council in Tacoma Park, and I'm going to use the time-worn excuse of the Beltway and bad weather.
Well, welcome.
I was trying to drive fast, but I realized I shouldn't kill myself to get here. So
Yeah, before we go, I had asked Margaret when you got here. Margaret, can you give us a little review of what we discussed last time and,
You betcha.
and where we are today?
Okay, so legislation passed that allows the municipality to request that their election coincide with the general election, whether it's a presidential or gubernatorial year. And they need to file their request with the state board and also the local board of election. So we met with the Jesse Carpenter and members of the local board of election and talked through specific issues that we believe could serve as a deterrent, and also where we could work together. We had several conversations, and overall, our belief is that this could work. It definitely follows the spirit of the law. The city of Tacoma Park has right now 4 precincts that coincide with our precincts, and if we are successful in finding a new home for some of the voters at the Tacoma Park Rec Center, so it would be 5. Each precinct, the city and county, would vote in the same precinct location, but in separate rooms. We recommend that a greeter be stationed inside the entrance to these 4 or 5 precincts. We would split the cost of the greeter, but everything else would be separate: the check-in judge, the voting judges, the chief judges. And again, that's because they have the city of Tacoma Park has ranked choice voting, which is a separate voting system as opposed to our statewide voting system. And they permit individuals that are outside of the parameters of 16-year-olds and non-citizens to participate in their municipal elections. The city and county would continue to separately recruit and hire and train their election workers for the polling place, and the poll books would be separate for the city and county, and this is where we have to have the state board agree to be a participant. If the state maintains the same poll books in 2018, the city could lease from us a couple of, at least 2 poll books per site, plus an extra in case something fails. And the only thing we would need to do is prepare and load the data, and the state needs to agree to add that additional data to their poll books of the 16-year-olds and the non-citizens, so that they would have a complete poll book. If the state procures a new poll book, the county will have, we have purchased poll books because what the state purchased was inadequate. We've purchased poll books over the course of many years, and so we will not have any poll books to lend. So the city will have to decide if they want to lease poll books from the state vendor, or if they want to go out and get their own poll book and make arrangements for someone to take the data that we have and load it into that. This will be a cost that's higher for the Tacoma Park municipality, but it's a cost that they will have to absorb because we will not have any extra poll books to distribute to the city of Tacoma Park. The state will, if we use the current state program, the state has preliminarily supportive at this time. Will program the poll books for the city as it has in the past. That will require an MOU with the state as it has in the past. And then, of course, the last option that nobody's excited about is to return to the paper precinct register for the Tacoma Park voters. This is the last gasp option that anybody would want. But, and there's some things that could possibly be done internally, and Jesse and I have talked about it, but we want to be able to go forward to the state to get them on board on this MOU. The sample ballots would need to be separate. The city would mail its own election notices. The county may, with the permission of the board, add a line or a box to our sample ballot mailer about the notice of the Tacoma Park municipal election. The county call center can handle the municipal calls and refer to the city as necessary. If City of Tacoma Park were to utilize the ES&S system, the cost for a ballot is 21.5 cents per ballot, and the city would have to pay the same amount. If the city wants to opt out to create their own ballot system, then that would be up to the city, and they would just need to spell that out in the MOU, as well as informing the state board that they're not using the ES&S product. Accessible voting. We explored what's involved in leasing state ballot marking device and having them set up for our election, or for the city election. We're not really sure this could be done separately from a total ES&S election, that's being the vendor. So one of the things that we are going to help the city explore is if there's some workaround, homegrown product that may be available in other jurisdictions. So that's but it would be up to the city to decide how they were going to handle accessible voting. The state now uses the folding voting booths and a wheelchair accessible booth. The county would be able to provide one accessible booth for each voting system site and could provide 2 regular booths for each site. We do have the old blue booths that we've used in the past. We would be happy to lend those to the city. The city has actually stated they would just as soon use their tables and privacy screens, so that becomes a non-issue. The city will not have municipal election early voting at the county early voting sites. If the city should choose to have early voting, it'll be at their city community center. It will be a separate process for absentee ballots. If the county receives the city request, our staff will fax it down to the Tacoma Park, and the city would do the same if for some reason they ended up with a county-state request. Splitting 1368, all agreed that that precinct needs to be revisited. No location has been found. The city of Tacoma Park has decided to jump in our corner and see if they can help us find a location down there. We're coveting Don Bosco, Cristo Rey High School. So we're going to try to once again approach them. There is a Baptist church there. There's some issues with that, but we're hoping that Tacoma Park can help us at the high school or the learning center. So what we would like to do is to have the board begin the process to allow the city of Tacoma Park to proceed as according to the legislation with the support of this local board to approve a motion to proceed to the development of a memorandum of understanding inclusive with the State Board of Election to permit voting in the same precinct but in the same rooms. And because they are looking in separate rooms. Sorry, can't read my own handwriting. And that would allow us to get the state to agree to what they need to agree to so that the city can proceed with, because they have certain legislative duties they have to abide by.
Well,
Jesse, do you want
Councilman? Yeah, I'd like to hear from.
Sure, I'm happy to talk. Thank you for that. First of all, and again, sorry to be late. First of all, I want to thank you because obviously a huge amount of work has been done to go through all of those points, which are things that maybe we didn't even think about when we started down this path. And just for why we started down this path, we're not just into doing difficult logistical things for the heck of it, but what we found is that in our purely local elections, like the one where I was elected in 2015, we had about a 10% turnout citywide. The ward I was in was a little bit higher than that. In the gubernatorial House of Representative years, it's about 40%, and the presidential has been 75%. So from the turnout perspective, we just think, people are elected to city council getting 200 votes, 100 votes. I think I got maybe 600 or 700, but that was on the high end. And so we just think in terms of participation and resident engagement, it would be preferable if we could have a bigger turnout. And the reality is, maybe we should feel bad that people don't want to turn out for our elections, but they turn out more for the others. So that's the reason for doing the syncing up. And if we do it, it wouldn't change anything for the election that we'll have this year, 2017, but ideally in 2018, then that would be the first year. And for those of us who, if we decide to run for re-election to the council again this year, that would just be a one-year term, because I don't think any of us think that we can tell our constituents, hey, by the way, we'll take a 3-year term to do it. So the idea would be in 2017, that would be a regular council election, and 2018 would be the first year, and that would synchronize us in the so-called even years. We had originally explored combining with the state and just being all in with the state because of these local sort of artisanal provisions that we have, which include the non-citizen and 16 to 17-year-old voters, as well as same-day registration and the immediate runoff. The state said they can't do that. So that's how we've ended up with this side-by-side piece. And in fact, Ocean City does a version of that. They do it all in one location, probably a little bit easier than having 4 or 5 precincts, but we're accustomed in the city in the even year elections to voters having to go to one of 4 or 5 different precincts. So I think that part's doable. We like the idea, which was just suggested, of having the greeter out front to direct people and explain what's going on. Now some people might say, well, geez, if they go vote in the first one, are they going to actually cross over and go into the room and vote in the next one? I guess it's possible there could be a drop-off. From what we've seen, certainly in Ocean City, pretty much everybody who does one does the other. Could there be someone who comes in, at 8 o'clock and they're racing and then they've got to go get their kid and maybe skip? I don't know, but it's still going to be higher, I think, by a lot than what we've seen with the local elections. So we think that's a good solution. I think most of the precincts easily have space, Jesse, right, for 2 locations co-located in there. The area you're talking about isn't in the ward that I represent, so I'm less familiar with what the options would be there, but I think Don Bosco, I know the mayor and the council member from that area are in pretty good terms with the principal there. It's a private Catholic school, and they may be very, very willing to do it. But for us, what you've laid out, and Jesse can jump in if there's anything that I haven't mentioned, that sounds like a really good process that would work for us. We're comfortable picking up, I'll say now on behalf of my colleagues, we'd have to vote to do it, but picking up the extra costs that you described that would be involved, and a lot of the work will be done by volunteers. We have one of our longtime volunteers, Mr. Olson, down at the end of the table, and we're confident that we would be able to get enough people to cover the other precincts. We would have enough of an advance notice on that, and as far as the polling books go, whatever the extra cost is, I think we would do that, as well as the sample ballot, which doesn't strike me as unduly costly. So I'll just stop there, but we appreciate the work that's been done so far. We would be very even more appreciative if the board would vote to approve what you described and send us toward working out this process with the state. But we're happy to answer any questions. And again, Jesse, feel free to mention all the things I forgot to say.
No, I have nothing to add. I'm happy to
How many
respond to
precincts are
questions.
involved?
4, possibly 5.
Do we see any problems with someone who's going to vote in your election and the state election?
Well, they're going to have to spend a little more time in the precinct, but we think in the end it's going to be more convenient for them than having to come in in another year, have to go vote again. This way they'll be able to do both, both on the same day at the same time. But so it's going to take a little longer for voters.
And they would have to check in 2 separate times.
They would.
Because we don't want the 16-year-olds, non-citizens crossing over.
That's what I'm a little confused with in hearing that. Why would the poll book is used for the check-in for our elections.
The city of Tacoma Park would enter into a separate agreement with the State of Maryland Board of Elections, leasing some of our extra poll books to utilize over on the city side, and they would have their own chips developed so that they could do their election out of the poll book. And of course the big thing is voter history, record voter history for the municipal elections.
So you'd have to check in twice.
But the
so
information.
why even get into the poll book situation? Why wouldn't they simply handle their check-in the way they always have?
We
they
have been
use our
using
poll books.
Poll books.
They do use it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Is there any cost to these sites that we're
Yeah. What's the overall cost to us?
Right now, the cost to us would be the shared cost of the greeter. The city is picking up the cost of their ballots, their own judges. They will pay for any programming costs for the printer, the ballots, accessible voting. We're not going to, right now, we're not going to make the ballot marking device available. They would need to lease that if they chose to. There's a lot of issues around the accessible ballot. They're talking about using tables and chairs. The only thing, if we did talk about having to, at one of the schools, Piney Branch, isn't that the elementary school?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
They would have to make arrangements for their own furniture.
Is there any cost to these?
So the only cost there would be we would split the cost of 4 or 5 greeters, which is $75 divided by 2.
There's no rentals at any of these proposed locations?
They're all schools.
And churches.
Well, the church, you're right, but right now we have an issue. I mean,
we may need it anyway.
I was going to say we have to find
That precinct is
that
very crowded.
precinct is overwhelmed with people.
It's very crowded.
And we need to find something else. To me, this is a marriage of convenience with a shotgun behind it, with just on that precinct alone.
I got you.
That's my practical review of it.
What is the likelihood of this opening the door to all the municipalities
Rockville, Gaithersburg.
in terms of their
They may come
elections?
abstain.
Well, it depends if, the city, okay, I'm not going to speak completely for the city of Tacoma Park, but they have ranked choice voting, which is a separate system. They are in charge of their own ballots, and they tabulate all on their own. So that would, all of those costs and all of those things that would occur will occur whether they have the election with us or separately. Yeah, it's possible that the city of Rockville and the city of Gaithersburg may jump on, but I have not talked to either about that possibility.
Or small entities like
Garrett
Garrett Park,
Or yeah.
and any of the. We have a lot of them.
Well, I'm not really sure how. Maybe you should talk to Kevin. I'm not sure how far down this legislation allows for municipalities. Do you know if there's a?
Well, no, it doesn't really set a threshold. But
Okay.
keep in mind that Rockville and Gaithersburg would be able, under this legislation, really to be added to the ballot.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Because Tacoma Park is, because of these other issues, they're going to have to use a separate room. But under this legislation, Gaithersburg or Rockville would petition to be actually on the ballot and be able to go ahead and do it that way. So we would be in a situation where they would be in this. They would be in the same room. We would check them in and do all that other stuff. So it's a different situation.
How many voters do you all have?
Registered voters around 12,000, something in that range. Right. So it's this. Remember, though, it's the same voters. And 99% of the voters who would be coming to vote are the same ones that are already coming to the precinct to vote.
I understand. I was thinking about if we were going to pick a threshold, would it be amount of voters or amount of precincts, or I'm not even sure how you could pick a threshold that we would.
I was only referring to the legislation.
No, I understand that.
Okay.
If I may say, this is it's going to be a challenge. It's for us as a municipality, and I think our city council wants to do this because it would bring in more voters, and we think that's important. And ideally we'd be on the ballot, but that's just not going to work for us. So this is the alternative we've come up with, and since there's precedent in the town of Ocean City, we thought it would be worthwhile to
try to jump in. We did have in 2015, in addition, in our local election, in addition to the mayoral vote and the city council vote, there was a referendum. It was a non-binding referendum. It passed by a very overwhelming margin. Jesse maybe remembers the number, but it got like 80% of the vote, I think. And so that set us on this path, and basically what it said was we should try to synchronize with the even years, provided we could preserve these more or less four unique characteristics that we have. If it wasn't for those things, the non-citizen vote, the 16 and 17-year-old, the ranked voting, and so on, as Jesse said, we could just be added right to the ballot. The state would all be in the same room. We'd be barely having this conversation. It's because of those unique features that we have to separate that out. And so from our point of view, what happens now in these elections is everybody goes to the one location because the turnout's so small. And every candidate for city council is standing there, and although there's two doors, pretty much we all saw every voter coming. So that's a thing that we wouldn't have anymore. That's a nice local thing to have. Instead, some people would get to stay their whole time at a single precinct. I think for whatever set of reason, if I run again, I'm going to have to jump around between three. But that's just the way it'll be. But to do that and know that the turnout could, triple or quintuple, to me seems worth it. And that'll be something we'll have to go through on the city council, but based on the conversations we've had so far in the city council and that referendum, I think that the city is committed to it if we can find a way to do it. It does mean, getting cooperation and working closely with you all, and it feels like we're on the path to that, and we think it'll work.
And the State Board of Elections.
Yes,
we have to get the state.
But this is the precursor.
Have we outreached there at all?
Yes, I have. I have contacted them. There's two things they're concerned about. One, they're supportive. They think they can do it. I asked them specifically about the poll books, but they are also waiting for the legislature to see if there's any. We talked about the poll books. They're over 10 years old. There is a possibility. There's different concepts that are being discussed in terms of replacing them. Some of it could be phased in. Some of it is, across the board. Let's all jump in the pond together. So if they come up with new poll books, then that's the dynamic that changes everything. So then the city of Tacoma Park has to decide if they wish to lease these new poll books from the vendor, and then we have to get the programming done, or they have to contract with the vendor to do the poll book, or if they want to return to paper, which is everyone's last choice. And then they would have to decide eventually how they would get their each municipal voter history recorded.
Would they use, I understand how it would be good for Tacoma Park, and I'm concerned about the other municipalities, of which, as we all know, there's many. Would they use our pickup and delivery system, the trucks, and we would pick up, that would be totally separate, but they would come here to get some of the equipment?
The only thing that we would possibly, and that goes back to developing the MOU, is whether or not they wish to use one of our 4 or 5 of our accessible voting booths.
And what does that do to the security of, if ours has already been delivered and theirs hasn't, the security of the room?
Well, again, keep in mind, they will have, they're going to be in a separate room completely.
Completely. All right.
So their ballots will be in a separate room. Their polling books or precinct sheets will be in a separate room. The two shall never cross. The only place that they cross is at the greeter.
How about the scanner? Do they have
They're not.
scanner?
They're doing hand count.
They
don't.
They
don't.
Where do they deliver it? Over here, or to State Board? Their final count.
I don't know. That we've never had anything to do with their certification.
We've handled that all
You do your own in-house.
It's
right.
This strikes me as having been very well thought out and worked out to the extent that it has been so far. And I want to thank everyone involved for that. It sounds like it's something that would be of great convenience to the voters at a very marginal cost to us. And quite frankly, from what I saw in the Tacoma Park area precincts that I went to on election day, that extra greeter would be valuable to us regardless of whether it's valuable to the city. So if we're able to split the cost of the greeters, that's a benefit to us. So I personally would be in favor of proceeding with this. I think I'm not sure that other municipalities are going to be similarly motivated, because not all of them have had a local referendum in which they were essentially directed to do this. But if they do, it sounds like it would be much simpler than it is for Tacoma Park. Probably also a marginal additional cost to us, if any. And once again, we'd be performing a service for the voters. And so I'm not sure I see any significant downsides to this.
What do you need from us today?
The motion. I would like the board to approve a motion to proceed to develop a memorandum of understanding with the City of Tacoma Park, inclusive of the State Board of Election, to permit voting in the same precincts but separate rooms.
Is there a second? A second?
You want to figure out who
We have a
was.
second?
I
Need a second?
I
Dave, a
move
second?
whatever Margaret
Fine,
said.
fine.
Move
Whatever.
second.
I'm
David
not, I
second.
don't want to fight with anybody. Whatever,
Okay.
Any,
whatever you guys want.
Who seconded?
I'll second.
David.
Yeah, that's
Any,
fine.
any discussion?
Yeah, has this, since you're sort of hearing this for the first time, I take it that you have not had discussion on the details within your own council?
Well, we've had discussions at a number of times leading up to this, including understanding and having heard from Jesse and our local Board of Election folks that just jumping in with the state full bore isn't going to work, that we're going to have to do the split piece. We haven't heard this yet, but actually one of the items on our agenda for this Wednesday, when we have our regular meetings, is this specific issue, with the understanding, in fact, and I actually sent out a little thing to my constituents today that said, I didn't know I was going to be here, but that the board is meeting today, and that what we'll have on Wednesday will be an update, including a description of what happened here. We didn't know if there would be a motion necessarily, as well as Mr. Olson had done some research on the Ocean City situation, and so we're keeping up with, because Jesse is in contact with the staff here all the time, on where things stand. Obviously, it would be a very positive thing from my perspective anyway if we could go on Wednesday and be able to say, hey, the board voted to, not make it all done, but send it a little further down the path. So I think we are as up to date as we can be. Just we didn't, we don't know how the motion's going to fare. But
Councilman, quick question.
Yeah.
Is there any opposition in your council or from civic leaders? And if there is, what is it?
I would say what we've seen mostly has been, it's generally been close to unanimous to just continue doing the research. I would say there's two members of the council who have expressed some concern / opposition. I was only elected in 2015, the same time that the referendum came up, so I wasn't on the council at the time the referendum was drafted. Jesse can say more about that, but my sense is it's kind of in the 6 to 1, 5 to 2 range to go forward.
What's their opposition?
I've had a hard time getting it, to be honest. I think there are some people in this city who like the small town feel, that we all go to the same place, that we all sort of see each other. And I'll tell you, that is an amazing thing. I've only been through it once, but having the entire city come to this place and sort of see it was great. But to me, the trade-off on the other side of just having large numbers of people who don't participate, and we had folks, I don't want to get too diverted, but we did do 2 of our own alternate early voting sites, again, just organized for us, not with any of the rest. And instead of just doing them in the municipal building, we did it in 2 other locations in the city. One was at the rec center that was described, and one was kind of in a park area on Sligo Creek Parkway. So it was set up there under a tent, and there were people outside the tent, not in the voting, grilling stuff. And people would walk by, oh, what's going on here? Well, there's a vote today. Oh, really? Where do you live? Oh, I don't know. Here's your address. Do you live in the city of Tacoma? I do. And you can vote. I can? Well, I'm not registered. I'm not registered. Well, you can register today. Really? And this actually happened numerous times. Again, this is across the city, not from the part I live in. And to me, that was just an illustration of, we really need to do this. And for me, I will say, my predecessor was getting about 200 votes in each of the elections, and he decided not to run. I didn't have a problem with it. So I decided to run. But if I wanted to challenge him, I would have thought, well, I need at least 200 votes. Those are all the people I know. I wouldn't do it. But if someone said, hey, 1,000 people are going to vote, then I would say, oh, good, I can create my own coalition and maybe challenge. So people have said they don't like this because they think it's not going to lead to more competitiveness. I think the opposite is more likely true. If we know lots more voters are coming out, we might get more turnover.
Yeah.
But that's the sort of philosophical divide is, will this or will it not promote contested elections? Of the 6 council elections, only 1 was contested. I had 2 opponents. I guess maybe I did something wrong, but myself and the mayor were the only ones who even had any opponents. So to me, this is not only a great thing for engaging more people in the community, it actually has the potential, I think, to promote more competition. I think the opponents, it's not that they're against that, they have had other ideas about how to promote more competitiveness, and I think that's probably what it comes down to. So I mean, the disagreements have not been bitter as much as just, will this do what we hope it'll do?
Is there any other discussion? Okay.
I don't mean to take a lot of time from our agenda, but I think this is a big decision. I agree with you. Anything to encourage voters, I'm all for, but we want to make sure we're doing it correctly. The references to Ocean City. I'd like to hear a little bit about how that compares with this.
Sure.
And how long have they been doing it?
Yeah, my understanding they've been doing it since 2012. They're not as big as us or have as many voters, and they just have one location, and it's a location they control because Ocean City's a big convention spot, and that's where they do it. I don't know Arthur, do you want to say something about it? Arthur's a resident and a member of our board of elections who did some research, if that's appropriate.
He actually observed the most recent election there. He was there.
So I think the key thing that I can tell you from that observation is that they really do manage to conduct completely separate elections to the point where Ocean City is using old-fashioned lever voting machines. So that makes it obvious that the two are separate. They do use the parallel poll books that are being suggested here. Both the city and the county, Worcester, are using the same model poll books, but of course they have different sets of data loaded in, and on election day, those data entries are completely separate. One thing to be aware of in terms of potential downsides, voters really will, if you have side-by-side polling places, compare their voting experiences. So if one group has a long line and the other does not, then people will be even unhappier about the long line than they would otherwise be. But that also gives an opportunity to shine in performance and perhaps a motivation to shine in performance.
But I would say also the likelihood has to be that, where we have, potentially just a mayor and a city council vote, assuming there's no referendum, so in a given year, typically for our local election, there might just be 2 votes that a voter would have to cast. If you think about, we don't have the kind of, questions like California does, but there's always, 4 or 5 of them as there were this last time. So if you have that in a presidential year and then all those other votes, the likelihood is that is going to be a slightly slower moving line. I don't know whether, I would like to think the average voter would understand that if you have, when you buy 50 items versus 4 in the grocery store, you do get through a little quicker and you understand that. I think as long as they meet well-trained, polite people, it's probably going to be okay. But, Arthur makes a good point that there will be that comparison.
And this will be every 2 years, is that correct? So you'd be on both the federal, so-called federal ballot, and with the state local.
Exactly. Right.
Question? Call the question.
All those in favor of the motion as read into the record by Margaret, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Unanimous. Let's move forward.
Margaret suggests that you put signage in the MOU. Okay. Yeah, we can.
Thanks for your...
Thank you for having us and really for doing all this analysis and work. It's very good. It's very helpful.
Thank you.
I have a little stack of business cards.
Credit needs to go to Jesse Carpenter and the Board of Elections.
Yes,
Tacoma
Jesse,
Park.
thank you, and thank the Board of Elections. Thank you for your
I
work.
thought I wasn't sure. Right? You didn't vote on that.
No.
It was unanimous.
Okay.
Okay.
No problem.
Peter, thanks.
Mr.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Okay. Allison, are you ready to talk about legislation?
Well, let me just make one preamble on that. Senator Cheryl Kagan had sent me 3 bills, like last week, recently, that she wanted our comments on, and I told her that we weren't meeting until today. She introduced 3 bills that had a hearing last Thursday, and I said we were going to meet today to discuss that and other legislation. So at some point, she'd like to hear our views on her 3 pieces of legislation. Although, when I got her legislation, Margaret indicated to me that Mayo was reviewing them and we're going to take positions on them at the hearing last Thursday. So with that, of this legislation, 3 of them are from Cheryl Kagan.
Do we know what happened at that meeting? Oh, you're going to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
So there was a hearing, the first hearing on Thursday of the election bills that had been scheduled up to that point in the Senate. As Jim stated earlier, the 3 of them were Senator Kagan's bills, and the Mayo Legislative Committee, directors and deputies, each county gets 1 vote, met on Wednesday in advance of the hearing on Thursday to discuss positions on these bills. I was in attendance at that meeting, and I voted to take no position because our board had not yet met to take any positions. But there was a clear majority of members of Mayo's legislative committee there, who voted one way or another on each one of them. And so most of the directors and deputies in attendance voted in favor or to take a position in support of Senator Kagan's Senate Bill 91, which basically requires video streaming of the State Board of Elections meetings.
Real time.
I think it's live.
Yeah.
It is real time.
Video feed stream.
Yeah.
I don't have the fiscal note here in front of me, but it wasn't that much money, and the sense of the group was that it would be a good thing for folks from the local boards of elections to be able to watch the state board meetings online rather than needing to travel to Annapolis to witness them. And so that was the position that Mayo take, and so Stuart Harvey, on behalf of Mayo's legislative committee, testified in support of that bill. Senator Kagan's Senate Bill 64 would allow voters who are unaffiliated to do what an unregistered voter can do now when they go to early voting and they register. You know, right now you've got an unregistered voter, they come up to early voting, they can register and then vote on election day. Would allow an unaffiliated voter to choose a party at early voting. It would not, yes. It would not allow people who were already registered with a party to switch their party at early voting.
So it's an open primary for independents.
Basically.
Yeah.
The position of Mayo, the votes of those assembled, was one primarily of concern about how many ballots we would need to print in anticipating how many people would take advantage of this option, especially in the context of not knowing if we're going to be able to use the touchscreens for early voting or not, and also one of concern about the state of our current poll books and doing any more add-ons to the programming of the poll books. And so on those 2 bases, and then also there was some discussion of the sort of fairness question and where you draw the line of who gets to switch and who gets to make that choice or not make that choice. But basically with those 3 discussion points, those 3 sets of talking points, Mayo did testify in opposition to the bill. So that was Mayo's position on that one. Senator Kagan's election observers bill, the bill as we read it at the time, basically allowed for a fairly lengthy list of types of observers to more or less self-appoint, and that if you were affiliated with an academic institution or international observers to be able to go to a polling place and more or less self-appoint themselves to be observers. That was definitely opposed by the Mayo membership.
As I read that bill, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it also opened up the entire polling place to for observers. In other words, they would no longer just be in an area, but they could, if you will, roam throughout the.
I thought that it had a provision saying that they were going to have the same rules as the poll watchers.
It says here, observer to have access to the voting room. Doesn't put any
So anybody can walk in and it's going to be...
Also, does that mean on election day those lists have to be available? It says on document, could I walk into a polling place on election day?
Currently, no. The list, if you wish to have a list of individuals from a polling place, you need to make a request, and there's a statutory requirement by a specific date, and it's then made available to anyone who wants to sign up on the affidavit that says you're not going to use this for commercial purposes.
And I assume that's in this law too. That is not here in the summary. It said just provided election observers on receipt of documentation. This appears they can walk in election day and ask for it.
Yeah,
but
no,
it would not be.
You cannot walk in. First of all, we don't have paper precinct registers.
No, I understand that. It's just not on here.
Yeah.
That's all I would say.
There was some discussion among the directors and deputies of different interpretations of that as well.
Right?
As I read it, I didn't see it to be creating any requirement to do anything really new or different on that, other than to maybe codify it more so with that the state board would need to issue some regulations on, to more clearly determine the timetables for that. But that, in any event, Mayo took a vote to oppose the bill. But then subsequently, the day of the hearing, we learned that Senator Kagan had an amendment, which I have copies of here. It's not yet online, but which removes the ability of these outside organizations to self-appoint themselves as election observers and requires them to go to the state board to get that designation. And so that was really the basis on which Mayo was going to oppose it. So
how does that make it different than what exists now?
It doesn't. The board,
it doesn't necessarily.
The local board makes the decision right now who will be allowed into. Okay, you have to allow the poll watchers from the various political parties and the candidates. And then there's something else that's allowed. But otherwise, the local board is the ones that decide who's going to go into the polling place. And that's how come we have, people contact Margie and who's in and where they're going, and, we give them specific parameters.
So I think, and Margie may have commented on this as well, but I think, as I read it, sort of generally speaking, the state sets the rules on this. They've got, regulations. The work falls at the local board. And we met with Senator Kagan's staff, and I articulated that I felt like the outside organizations, when they contact us, it's not merely a matter of obtaining permission. It's a matter of actually working with Margie. Margie puts a lot of time and effort into working with these outside groups and working with Leslie, with others, to sort of identify the right match for that individual and what they're trying to accomplish. And that at the end of the day, in order for an outside group, an academic group, whomever it is, to have a positive experience, it's in their best interest to be directly in communication with us. Now, if there's reasons for the state board to have sort of a slightly differently codified, or to be prompted to need to go back and rethink some of their regulations on this, I don't quite understand the expectations in terms of the state serving as more of a gatekeeper, perhaps taking on more of a role in this sort of having groups need to contact the state prior to contacting Margie. But I think in reality, the state staff would more or less always end up referring them right on to Margie to have the same conversation that they have right now.
There's the clarification that, and I have not read this in any detail whatsoever, but there's the clarification between whether we're talking about an observer or a watcher. Okay, so the watchers go to the State Board of Elections and get a certificate. They're certified to be an election watcher. They're given additional access than what we consider an observer here at the local level. So the watcher is the one who can sit there where the poll book is and they can watch what's going on. An observer has more limitations on them. So I would need to read this to clarify. But from that perspective, what I learned, and Kevin may help me chime in on this one, we had two experiences in the general election where there was a group that wanted to be a watcher, who wanted to sit in the polling place all day and watch what was going on. But because they were not of a specific category, they were not eligible to be a poll watcher. And so they were only eligible to go to the local board to be an observer. And because I don't let people just hang out in a polling place all day, they have to meet at a specific time with someone so that they're not encumbering the election judge with additional, questions and things when the election judge has a much more important focus. There was some back and forth, and I can't remember what that classification was that the state was not considering. But so anyway,
it was a watcher. They did not have the credentials from a political party or a candidate.
Right. So to be a watcher, you have to be affiliated with a candidate or political party, and so there are educational groups, universities, foreign groups that would not have that affiliation, that would not qualify. That may come into play in this, but I don't know. So I just just throw that out for whatever it may or may not be worth.
I'm concerned about the lists. Do we charge for those lists?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Well, maybe the summary is not, but I'm a little concerned, and I haven't studied this bill, but it says requiring an election judge to designate reasonable times for election observers to examine polling lists. What does that mean? That almost sounds like there has to be, on election day, the right for someone to look at
the poll book.
I don't know what list they would be looking at, but
there is no that, and I guess
but
that's
that
my
language
concern.
if that's an accurate summation, that's concerning.
I think that's current statute.
I didn't do my own summary. I just copied and pasted the summary there, and now I'm wishing I'd done my own because I'm trying to remember the language and the way it is.
I believe that is current
up.
statute. And what it does is expand it to election observers. And the way it's been handled in the past, not that we've ever had anybody do it, of course there's always the first time, is that the individual, the different political, but generally speaking, it's political parties or candidates. They request a list of registered voters, and we sell it to them for $78, just in case you want to know, on a CD, and they break it out by precinct, and they print out the list. So
you mean the person who buys it?
The political party does,
yeah. Political party or the candidate at their designated precinct, and they sit behind the poll book and listen to the judge hear the name, Margaret Jurgensen.
The old-fashioned way.
You have done that. But you have to make the request.
For many years.
You have to make the request in advance of election day. There is not a paper precinct register list at any polling place on election day. Nor can you. I mean, think about it. 700,000.
Oh, it would be impossible. That's why when I didn't read it here, I
for early voting
asked the question. It'd be impossible.
The bill's not that long. I mean, the bill basically the relevant parts that are changed. Right now, you have the underlying statute that says that a copy of a list of registered voters shall be provided to a Maryland registered voter if and on receipt of, and it just adds the category of or an election observer. So that means that it would not necessarily just be a Maryland registered voter asking for these lists. It would be allowing, potentially an out-of-state election observer to be able to ask for these lists as well. So that just or election observer is the only change to that section, which underlying it all is just the procedures that somebody has to follow right now to be a Maryland registered voter. The next one, where it says that there's underlying law again that says an election judge shall protect a challenger or watcher in the exercise of their rights, and it says and an election observer in the exercise of rights is provided in this subtitle. There's just a couple of other places where it talks about others in the polling place, and it just says and election observer, or election observer. The relevant part of it then says that they would be has the right to enter the polling place 1/2 hour before the polls open, enter or be present at the polling place at any time when the polls are open, remain in the polling place until the completion of all tasks associated with the close of the polls, maintain a list of registered voters who have voted or individuals who have cast provisional ballots and take the list outside the polling place, and enter or leave a polling place for the purpose of taking outside the polling place information that identifies registered voters who have cast ballots or individuals who have cast provisional ballots. And then it says that they may not attempt to ascertain how a voter voted or intends to vote. They may not converse in the polling place with any voter. They may not assist a voter in voting or physically handle an original election documents. And then it says specifically that an election judge may eject an election observer who violates the other rules, those prohibitions. And then it says that the state board may adopt regulations to carry out this section.
And the list have everybody's phone number and party affiliation and age on it?
It says keep lists. There was this discussion about whether or not the bill required us to somehow generate a list in the polling place, and I'm not sure where that conversation came from because I don't see it in the language in the bill. It says that they need to be allowed to maintain a list. It doesn't say that we have to furnish.
In other words, they could create a list. Presumably
come with it.
Listening to the names, or come with a list that they purchased, or
we don't have the phone numbers on our list.
They need to be allowed to request that list in advance, just like any other registered voter who requests that list in advance.
And then check the names off as people vote.
But there's no underlying change to those, other than just adding or an election observer.
Well, I guess that might be a concern here, because if you're adding observers to all these categories, which had previously been just watchers, is that that's opening up to
a lot of
anybody, I guess, right?
That's what it sounds like.
I mean, my main questions are about the administrative, procedures we would follow somehow if these potentially out-of-state, observers, these international observers, are first going to the state board and they're getting some kind of sign-off from them before they contact us. But then once they get that sign-off from the state board, then they're doing a handoff, presumably to us, to work out the details.
How is that
Not
different?
always. No, not always.
How is that different than the international observers we have now? I mean,
well, most of them don't go through the state board because they're not affiliated with a political party or a candidate. So they're just calling the local jurisdiction that's most convenient to them, which is why we get so lucky with so many.
Right.
And normally and it's typically the same ones year after year after year.
Because the one I did in this election, I believe they did come through the state. Or at least at some point they were in contact.
And occasionally they do. I mean, I'm not going to categorically say they don't, but the majority of the people that I deal with have not gone through the state. So.
Margaret, historically, since they affect every county, they're statewide bills, and Mayo's taken a position, and the state board will take a position. Yeah. Have we as a local board taken positions on legislation in the past?
Oh, sure.
Sometimes you
have,
yeah.
We do.
Okay.
Occasionally.
Occasionally. Other times you just, see how it plays out.
So before we
get past that, just following up on Jim's comment, I guess part of my question is whether there's something specific about its effect on us that's different than the effect on the rest of the state that would warrant our getting involved on these.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, is this something for us to weigh in on, or?
You
That's
seem
an initial question
like you're
board.
starting a conversation that is sort of a higher level question about our weighing in on different bills and stepping out of that one individual one.
Right, and you have more to tell us?
Well, I just, before you sort of have that conversation only in the context of a single bill, I want to make sure that I'll just touch on the other types of issues that I would like some clarity on exactly that question.
Okay.
One is the first bill that you have listed here, which is Delegate Lukey's bill to authorize a minor who is at least 16 years old to serve as an election judge. Currently that starts at age 17. This would go down to age 16. I don't see among our peers any real problem with that. That seems like a good thing.
I thought it does go down to 16 now.
They can pre-register at 16.
They can pre-register, they can't serve
as a judge.
And they can be a future vote, down to age 12
Even if
or 11.
they're going to be qualified to vote in the general election.
17. Isn't it 17?
They can, an election judge, it has to be 17.
But Alex, in terms of what David said, what about these bills make it unique to us, our concerns?
Okay. The other piece of the bill is to pay election judges minimum wage, which is sort of a foundationally different way of looking at election judge payment than the way we do it now. We do a daily stipend. The state board has looked at this, and the way, there's a lot of assumptions you have to make in saying, well, how many hours is who working? But using a certain set of assumptions, the state has looked at this and perceives this to that most of us are paying somewhat above minimum wage. There's a few counties that are paying somewhat below minimum wage, and so we're kind of in that ballpark. But I know we don't want to get too far into the weeds on that one right now. Another bill that it would be great to have your now House Bill 143 is. I talked to Donna Duncan about this morning. This is all basically, as far as she's concerned, sort of technical clarifications. One is repealing a requirement for us to do something that doesn't exist, basically, or it's a may, that we may print voter acknowledgement notices and voter notification cards, and we just use voter notification cards. And as Donna Duncan described it, voter acknowledgement notice is not a thing that we do. Everything is called something else.
What is it?
It's like a cleanup to just get rid of this term for something that doesn't exist.
Okay.
Requiring political parties to certify the residential addresses of candidates to the state board. It's taking I have to pull back up the bill again to look at the detail of how it did this, but it was taking, I believe it was taking the state of the presidential candidates off the ballot, if I remember it.
Yes, that's how I read it.
Yeah.
I thought.
There it is. It's in the next sentence of the description,
Yeah.
repealing the requirement that specifies candidates be identified on the ballot by the state in which the candidate resides. Another one is there's House Bill 68 would require us to include some language some specific language. It's like the exact wording of it is sort of detailed in there. It says important, please read, about what you can do if someone challenges your right to vote at the polls, and requiring that to be both posted at the polls and in the sample ballot. And then there's also a bill here to require the local board of elections to establish a polling place basically at every college that has residential student housing.
With greater than 500 residents. And the college has greater than 500 residents. Yeah. Okay.
And then, merely for the purpose of completeness and to put a framework around your conversation, and then I'll shut up. There's a couple of conversations that we've had over time about several other different bills, and I tried to sort of identify what they were, what the things are that many of us have talked about, but I don't think the board has ever taken a vote to direct the staff to really go forward on. And I'm not sure that I have clarity on the exact position or priorities of the board on these things. One would be, there was a Conway bill last year, which she hasn't reintroduced yet to my knowledge, but it just kind of got eclipsed by the noise about the automatic registration. But it was to allow people to basically to have the same rules apply at early voting as apply on election day as far as doing an address change. If you change your address and you cast a provisional ballot, right now, election day, we count it. In part or in full, whatever rule applies. If you show up at early voting, that was captured in the law as a form of same-day registration, which requires proof of residence, and you rejected about 100 of those voters' provisional ballots in the last election. If they'd shown up on election day, we would have counted their ballot, but they showed up during early voting, and so you rejected it under the rules that apply to same-day registration. So if you want that change, Senator Conway had a bill last year to change it, and it just never went anywhere. The ritual where we bring you the double ballots of the people who voted both an absentee and a provisional ballot, and you all sort of grit your teeth and reject them both. If you would like us to seek a law change to count one of them, then let us know and we can do that, or we can pursue that. But right now we don't really have any directive to do that, and I'm not sure if I'm accurate in my reading that that's something the board would want. A third thing that we've talked about is being able to do same-day registration here at our office and not merely at the early voting sites during early voting. And a fourth thing which again, I don't know that was really intentionally excluded, so much as it was just the way the bill was drafted, that can only be done at the early voting sites. In many counties, that includes their office. In ours, we don't do early voting here, so we can't do same-day registration here. And then the fourth is the discussion that we've had about changing the process for opening the absentee ballots. And I am not clear on the board's directive as far as, I know that there's a lot of complaints about having to sit here for, weeks while you're watching paint dry as we're opening all of these envelopes. I know that from a staff perspective, we've discussed, and the volume of the ballots that we're trying to get opened, it would be awfully nice if we were to be able to begin opening those ballots before Election Day. Maryland is, or at least on Election Day, Maryland's the only state in the entire country that doesn't allow absentee ballots to be voted at least on Election Day, if not before. So I know personally I would love to change that, but I'm not entirely clear on the board's directive and what we should or shouldn't be pursuing. If we should be trying to pursue something at a relatively late day in the legislative session at this point, if we should table that kind of a discussion for the next legislative session. Although talking with Donna Duncan about that this morning, she said that with the state board, she said that, if you all want to pursue something like that, then there's regulations that need to be written, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and you should really pursue that this year and not wait until next year to pursue something like that.
Pursue it
and
in
then
the next legislative session.
Have to get a law change and regulation changes and all of that in an election year.
Do I understand what you're saying is that we ask for it to be, we write it and do all of this stuff this year and then ask in the next legislative session to have it passed in time for the election? Or are you saying we should do it all right now and try to do it, have a law passed this year?
Well, my druthers would be to have the go-ahead from you all to go ahead and work, with our legislators and with the state board on trying to achieve these outcomes, to achieve these goals. In some cases, that might be doable this legislative session. In some cases, that might not be doable this legislative session. In some cases, it might just be doable by some sort of regulation.
Have you ever had anybody walk in, did you have anybody walk in this election day that tried to register that couldn't here at the building? We talked about changing
Jessica?
that. Did we have anybody that tried to register and couldn't?
We regularly were advising people to go to their early voting sites.
Did anybody try to register here that was not able to register here?
Yes. I had a lot of people walk in the front door asking to register to vote, and I had to tell them that they couldn't, and they would produce their sample ballot, and I would have to explain they had to go to the early vote center
And
to
they-
be listed. But they had came here requesting to register.
Wait, how would they get a sample ballot if they were not registered?
Yeah.
Or people who wanted to do address changes as well.
Oh, I see.
But yeah, I did. I had a lot of people. I told them to go to the map.
We have to have legislation in order to have this a voting place on early voting?
Yes. Well,
Or
I'm not saying
declare it to
no.
one of the 11.
No. This would remain off. What Allison stated is that we already have voting going on here. It's absentee voting.
Yeah.
But what we wish to extend is the same-day voter registration option as what's going on at the next year 11 early
So
voting
people would
centers.
come in here to register but couldn't vote here?
No, we would. That's
could put an
correct.
absentee ballot.
They can. Well, if somebody's not registered to vote, then they come into this office during early voting. We send them to an early voting center because although sure they can vote, we'll give them an absentee provisional ballot, and you'll promptly reject it because they're not registered to vote.
I'm not positive. I thought you said you wanted same-day registration, same-day voting registration here. Which means they could register here, but then they would have to go someplace else to vote.
They can vote absentee here. But we can't count it right now
But
because
that's a real
they're not
change
registered.
to what the law reads.
Yeah.
Except for
That was the
same-day
Conway bill.
registration
That was the Conway bill
applies
last
to
year.
early voting. It doesn't apply to absentee/vote by mail.
Yeah, that would be a change.
Huh?
Yeah, that would be a change.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the idea that people can come here and not register, and we have to send them to an early voting center to register, does seem a bit odd. Yeah, oh, I'm sure you do. I'm sure you did.
But what I was getting at, if they registered, that the only way they could vote would be absentee that day.
No, they don't get to vote because they're not registered.
No.
She said if the bill passed.
Oh,
But
if the bill passed?
So then they
yes.
they'd be considered an absentee voter, they wouldn't be considered an early voter.
Mm-hmm.
So when they're coming here, are they coming here thinking this is early voting?
Oh, we certainly get that as well.
People are confused
I'm
about
not-
what's
we're
the
not
difference
getting a
between
clear
early
answer.
voting and
Right.
absentee voting.
And then
They're
there's
confused.
really strange rules about when you can process
No, that
an
wasn't
absentee change
covered
for an absentee
in the
voter, so
state
it's
of
kind of a little loophole too.
Well, if you're looking for a reaction to the various things that you just suggested, in terms, not the legislation, not the existing bills, but the different concepts that we've talked about over the course of our various canvases, I think I would pursue all of them if it were up to me. The only thing that I want to think about is the idea of opening absentee ballots before the polls have closed. When I look at the chart that you gave us, there's a lot of states. Maryland is very late in terms of when its absentee count starts, but there are a lot of states that will say not until the polls close on election day, which to me sounds like a rational thing because you don't want word to leak out and affect the election, et cetera. But that while I hesitate to even contemplate the idea that we're giving you all some more work to do on election night and the day after election night, the idea that we have to wait until Thursday to open the ballots does seem a bit strange.
Can I add something here?
What
Yeah.
does open
Those
ballots
individual,
Yeah.
those states that Allison and Jessica did research on, is those states and the jurisdictions, the local election commissions and local boards of election, what they do is open those ballots, prep those paper ballots, lay them out flat, and then at some point, just like we do early voting, begin scanning all of those ballots until 8 o'clock at night, and then you get ready for early voting.
So you're saying they're open in advance?
So in Douglas County, Nebraska, or the state of Nebraska, we used to begin opening the ballots on Monday. And what we were doing was opening them up, flattening them out, because we realized that trying to get these ballots to go through a high-speed scanner and not having them jam up was a big issue.
But you
What
were
do you do in
comparing-
Kansas?
We mail 21 days before, and the first receipt of ballot, we have a special board that opens them.
Washington
Process-
State does
yeah.
the same thing.
We
There's a lot of
processed
states that do that.
75,000 ballots before the presidential and 12, and I can tell you none of us had a clue what was going on. We didn't care. There were so many pieces of paper flying. We don't tabulate. Nobody,
Tabulation did not occur
Right.
until election day.
But a lot of
Right.
people are going to be looking at it.
But it also
is David's point.
Yeah.
You were comparing it to the same. You said the same thing that we do with early voting. You don't run the tape for early voting till what time?
Well, we'll run
The
the tape
afternoon.
about. Well, we begin loading, whether it's we begin loading the memory disks. We load them as we get through each of the scanners, but we don't accumulate, which is the same thing we would do with paper ballots, until 7:45 or whatever, so that we obviously, before we can go post, we need to make sure that if there's 10,000 voters at Silver Spring, there better be 10,000 votes there too. So we do proof it before it goes public.
But you're not seeing election how
No.
people are voting.
No, that
Which
is
with
correct.
the paper ballot, that would be out there.
Yeah, I suppose that's one way to look at it.
There's a
think
research
that's
project
how
I'd love to do in my
Yeah.
free time when we get around to it, which is going through that chart that I shared was from the National Association of Secretaries of States, and so they're looking at their statutes and when they actually begin to what they call counting the absentee ballots.
Maybe-
But
right, maybe
Virginia
different
was an
things,
example where there's in the chart that says election day, and that's what their code says. But then they have another code provision that allows them to do what they call pre-processing, which for us it's the same thing we do with early voting right now. It's everything up to and including feeding those ballots into the scanner before election day. But they don't actually print the tapes that say who won, what the results were, until the close of polls, and that's what the chart says is which is election day. So Virginia's example that I shared is one that is on the chart. It says election day, but in reality they have these pre-processing procedures.
So you want to open and process, but not tally.
Correct.
That's the bottom line. Well, before election.
And I can see the benefit in that, but that one strikes me as a heavier lift than some of the other ones that you were talking about. I mean, I'm not sure if we would all agree as to what the rules should be when someone tries to vote by two different methods, but I'm guessing that throwing out both of them would not be the conclusion that we would ordinarily reach.
Well, I don't know. In my mind, that's more controversial than this last provision about allowing things to be opened early, because that's something we have a perceived need to kind of try to streamline this and speed it up. I think we could all agree on that. Some of these others, I think I'd want to think about it and discuss it first. But there is another one that I have mentioned before, and it wasn't one that you mentioned here, but perhaps to seek legislation to restrict the availability of the web delivery ballot, at least insofar until such a time as the printed ballot that comes out of the person's printer can be scanned, because this has just created a nightmare.
I agree.
For this canvas, and I'm all in favor of maximum access, but when it causes all these unintended consequences and problems, I think it's a big mistake.
And I would only agree to that if we had the same rules for all voters. If we're going to allow online ballot requests for some voters, then I personally would support doing it for all voters. I totally agree about the ridiculous system where we use a 21st century technology to request a ballot and 17th century technology to duplicate them all.
Margaret, do we know how many we got and how many
we have it was included in your report from Voter Services, but it will be covered in the PowerPoint presentation that accompanies the Voter Services. Yeah,
So
there's all sorts of great
there's 7 bills here that at this point we are not taking a position, although Mayo has taken positions on 3 of them. Mayo, I just got an email from Stuart earlier. He was looking for positions from all of us on Senate Bill 141, because that's going to be heard on Thursday. So there's 7 concrete bills that it would be nice to know if you want to take a position on them. And then there's this sort of more amorphous question of my request for guidance on some of these other topics.
Senate Bill 141 involves a situation that we don't have.
That's right. So we don't need to say anything.
So I'm not sure if there's a reason for us to get involved in that.
Why is that we don't have?
We don't have any.
We don't have a residential college in Montgomery County
that has over 500 students.
Yeah,
that's right. We don't have,
500
like University of
residential
Maryland
students.
doesn't count?
It's not Montgomery County.
Margaret, you mean 500 residential students?
Right.
But not okay.
Yeah. Right.
So
we don't have anything.
That doesn't affect us.
Right.
So do we need a motion on that one, or just say move on to the next
It's
topic?
not applicable.
NA.
Okay.
The ever popular NA.
Some of these other ones I probably would have some issues with, and the fact that they're being introduced by members of the Montgomery County delegation, probably indicates to me that the sponsors think it's going to have some effect here. I don't know, but and maybe the board would not be able to agree on a lot of these, but they seem to be, at least in my view, somewhat controversial.
Margaret, 143, do you have any comment? It talks about the local election director.
These are, as I understand it, this is just a cleanup bill.
Okay.
In theory, getting rid of that 17th century language. I hope that's true. There's probably some more things we could add. So I would say I really have no opinion.
When it says Chair Ways and Means Committee, is that how the state board, is that how Linda gets her?
Yes.
Her
That's an
legislation
administration bill.
So.
Yeah.
I'll add the chart. I'll add that to the chart. It's at the request of the state board. So the maybe to sort of start with the ones that Mayo has already taken a position on. House Bill 169, Senate Bill 91. That's on page 2. That is the video streaming the State Board of Elections meetings, which Mayo voted to support.
Yeah.
Does our board have a particular?
I think any of us who, we're more active as a group, certainly, than most in terms of state board meetings. I think absolutely. I mean, they don't go as far as we do in terms of having an audio of their meetings.
This would go further.
We go further.
No, this would go further.
This would go further. Yes, absolutely. But I think it would be great.
There's no cost to us, is there?
No.
The fiscal note says no.
You'd save on parking.
Yeah.
Watch it from home.
Would it engender problems between us and the state board?
No.
Mayo voted to support.
Huh?
Yeah, I think it's good.
Okay.
That's okay.
I'd like to know who would
That's
watch it.
fine.
Yeah.
The one
I mean, my
Some kind of survey of who
perception
would
is
sit at home and
that
watch it.
the state board
Nothing
isn't
else.
really.
Maybe I'll be able to hear the meetings too. Even when you're attend in person, it's very difficult. to
So what's
hear
the sense of the board on 169?
We said it's okay.
No, I mean 160.
Yeah, 169.
Yeah, 169.
House Bill is
91.
169
Yeah,
and Senate Bill 91.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the
fine.
sense of the board? Alex, what do you?
I mean,
Watch
I don't
it.
feel strongly about it one way or the other. So,
Jackie?
No
Yeah, I
position
feel
or
it.
support?
Who cares?
Okay.
We're recording it. It just means you have to have lipstick on.
Do you need a motion? I'll make a motion that we
Support it?
are supported.
I'll
Second.
second it. I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
No one opposed. So we support that.
Let me skip down to the other one that Mayo has a clear position on, which is Senate Bill 64, voter registration affiliating with a party. Mayo voted to oppose it.
Mayo.
I have my problem with this is I support what they're doing, but it's only half of the picture, and I think it's going to create even more controversy at the polls, if you will.
Yeah.
In other
Right.
words,
If it only applies to
it's
independents.
allowing somebody that's registered unaffiliated to be able to select a party at the same day registration, but it won't allow people registered in a party to select a different party.
That's the fairness
Yeah.
question, and I agree with you. And the independents then get to vacillate back and forth from one party to another in different elections, and that, particularly in Montgomery County, could sway elections easily
And
if
some
you
would-
get large groups of independents.
And some would view that as an incentive for
To
people
register
to register independent
independent.
and not with the parties.
Absolutely.
Which probably means that we would want to
doesn't
hear
appeal to
from
me
the
at all.
parties if we were going to
Yes,
take a position.
exactly.
It's really a party
It would.
issue.
It affects party.
well, and I don't know, Senator Kagan hasn't explained why this is even necessary.
Yeah.
I mean, at a certain level, you've got to, some of these decisions you got to make before you walk in the door, I think.
Well, I guess you can argue that it would increase turnout. I mean, increase.
Well, it might, but then again, it's going to create more administrative burdens to set this up and allow it to happen. And as Mary Ann points out, there is the fairness thing because the political party registrants wouldn't have the same ability. But I don't know why this is necessary.
I move we oppose.
Well, the other possibility is to try and get a better sense as to what she's trying to accomplish. Because in terms of the idea that people can register to vote at early voting, but they can't change their party affiliation seems a bit odd also.
Yeah. Well, do we want to table this or oppose
No,
it?
I oppose
There's a
it.
motion
Yeah,
on the table.
I made a motion to oppose.
I second it.
Any discussion? All those in favor of opposing this legislation?
Aye.
Aye.
All those in favor of the legislation?
I'm abstaining.
Yeah, I'm not sure we should take a position on it.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree. Mayo didn't support it, so maybe she'll go back to the drawing board and come up with something else. I say we just,
Well, we had 3 votes.
You have the vote.
Oppose
We have
it.
a
Pardon me?
vote.
Just took
We
the
have a
vote to
vote.
oppose it.
3
Oh,
voted to oppose
I
and
see.
2 voted to abstain. Is that?
Yeah,
Did I record
yeah,
that correctly?
Yeah, that's right.
What's the next?
Well,
Senate Bill.
just out of clarity, so is the board requesting that a letter be written to specifically state that the board opposes the bill?
Or do you go and say it? I mean, how is...
Well, it's already been heard.
so it
There's already
doesn't
been a
matter.
hearing on this.
Yeah, there has been a hearing. Additionally, the only thing at this point that could happen is that you could provide guidance to Allison for the record that, based on the conversations that happened here today, that you believe that there's further discussion needed to find out what the intent of the introducers
I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest that rather than writing a letter. I mean, if Allison is contacted and said, well, what's the board's view on this? I think she can say a majority is not in favor of it, but I wouldn't write a letter, which is what this board has sometimes done on particular legislation.
I like the way Margaret expressed that.
Yeah.
Okay.
We oppose it because we need more information.
Well, not only the intent, but why does the sponsor think it's necessary? Because it's going to have far-reaching effects to now. Yes, you allow people to same-day register, but the number of people who are not registered who come and do that's a distinct subset. But now, if you open this up to everybody, can start making changes on election.
Yeah, but this is a closed primary state.
Yes, it is.
And the parties control that.
Right now they do.
So that is what's basically it's doing, is making it an open primary state, because
Exactly.
everybody's going to register independent.
No, it's only open for independents.
But
it's certainly going to encourage a move in that direction.
I know lots of people that would.
Yeah, no, I understand. There's lots of people who would strategically take advantage of that.
Okay.
Well, I think, Margaret, the way you present, Allison, you got the signal?
Got it. So Senate Bill 58, which Mayo voted to oppose, but then withdrew its testimony after learning that there was this amendment. This is the Observer's Bill.
So we don't have.
I don't think we can do anything till we get that.
Well, again, I think there hasn't been an explanation of why this is necessary and who. I don't know if election observer is a defined term, but that could mean a lot of things.
Some of the terms.
But it just strikes me as this is a recipe for potential problems unless we know exactly why she thinks it's necessary. Was there some experience during the last election that motivated her to do this, to introduce this? Because that requiring these lists to be issued on demand on election day at the polls, that's a significant thing.
Yeah, David and Marianne make a good point. Why? Let's not get involved with this one right now. We don't have enough information. Is that
So I'll just move on in the absence of a motion on that. The election judges, it's almost two questions.
Which one
There's
is
the bill. The bill pairs both the 16-year-old piece and the minimum wage piece for election judges. The sponsor has already kind of broadcasted his willingness to split them apart into two different issues. But so it might be nice to kind of get the sense of the board on those two separate questions if the bill were to be split apart. But
let me point out that besides making the election judge an hourly employee presents a lot of issues in terms of recruiting election judges. Besides the fact that we're basically having individuals work for us on a regular basis, whether it's early voting or election day, anywhere from 20 to 24 hours for a stipend of $185 to $250. If in the next election, the state minimum wage becomes $10.10 an hour. If this bill were to become law, besides creating all sorts of new layers of work in terms of what we would have to do with FICA and all these different things, it would increase the cost of the election judges. Now, I'm all in favor of increasing the stipend. I know this board is in favor of increasing the stipend, but we are doing this in the most expensive process, and there are a lot of judges that will work for us, and as long as they get less than, $1,500 and no taxes are taken out? $1,700, no FICA, none, they'll work for us. We start telling them that we're going to pay them $10.10 an hour, and we're pulling out income tax and FICA. The problem of being able to recruit election judges has just doubled. So we already know that we're going to have a hard time getting primary. The easiest election to recruit for is the presidential general. The worst election to recruit for is a gubernatorial primary. And this is not something we need to put in place. As for 16-year-olds, I just want to tell you this one story. We have the gentleman who filed the complaint that wanted the hearing before the State Board of Election, Nikki Charlson. And the individual who was the provisional election judge was one of our future vote students who had gone through the process. She is 17 years old, and she was the person that this gentleman was threatening to drag out of school to take over to SBE to have this hearing. Now, I believe me, Roberto, I bow down to you for the 1,000+ students you recruited as election judges. But now we're adding these 16-year-olds. If we're going to do that, then we need to think through very carefully what roles we're going to give them, because as soon as I heard that it was a 17-year-old student who was our provisional judge that was going to have, I told Kevin, I said, you need to call this girl's parents and let them know that, this is going on, because at one point he was talking about subpoenaing, right?
Yeah.
So
how was it resolved?
You dropped it.
Well, he ultimately
That's
dropped
gonna
it,
be true for
but
But
he ultimately
when you're
dropped it. But
17 years old,
have
that's a deterrent.
He didn't have subpoena power, and I wasn't going to produce her anyway. So
Right.
That was going to be the end of it.
I'm not opposed to 16-year-olds, but I'm thinking that we need to think this through very carefully.
Look, I agree, Margaret. I share your concerns. I just think 16 is too young. I think you got to draw the line somewhere. And again, it's not like Delegate Lukey came to us and asked, "Hey, what do you think about this? This is what I think." He just goes ahead and introduces this bill, and requiring a minimum wage is almost like creating specified legal rights under employment law for election judges. I mean, I just don't think we want to go there.
Well, and the county executive's trying to increase the minimum wage in Montgomery County to $15 an hour. The state's increasing the minimum wage to $10 an hour. So what's the minimum wage that would apply here? Would we be required, because this is Montgomery County, to pay $15 an hour? Or would we be required to pay the state's minimum wage at $10 an hour?
The bill says the state minimum wage.
Okay.
I would just say from my perspective, and I realize that I may be in the minority here, I think that 16-year-olds should be able to serve as judges. I think that some of our best judges have been the young people who are among our most enthusiastic and dedicated and detail-oriented judges. It may very well be that we want to think about what roles we give them, but we want to do that for all our judges. We want to make sure that, because in the instance that Margaret spoke about, any judge in that circumstance would be in potentially a difficult spot. If I'd been the judge in that circumstance and I got subpoenaed, it would have been a great inconvenience and potentially a financial issue for me. But I personally, I think that it would be a good idea. I would not require that the judge be a registered voter, because I think that a 16-year-old often is not going to be. And I would just throw out as a possibility that if instead of a minimum wage we had a minimum stipend, and we didn't try and change the stipend to a wage, but we were to say that there would be a certain level of stipend below which we wouldn't go, I think that a lot of the bureaucratic issues that we're talking about would be solved. I think that we pay probably sufficiently that it wouldn't be an issue for us, and to the extent that state law required us to raise our stipend, oh well, I guess the county would have to fund it if we were to do that. So that's where I would come from if we are going to take a position.
I basically agree with all David's points. The 16-year-olds especially, we are going to have a hard time recruiting, we know, in the next election, the primary and the general.
Oh, June 26th? You bet.
Yeah. And so, I've seen a number of our paid election workers doing duties that certainly a 16-year-old can just as well do, where it hasn't fallen to a volunteer. It was a regular election judge person who's handing out the I voted and having people fill out the comment cards, and a lot of the greeters were also some of our regular staff and whatnot. I know we try to get volunteers, but I think they're, I would assume that when we get these people, not only are they coming through Alberto's process, but they're coming with recommendations from their schools as well. And these aren't kids goofing off for the day. And I mean, if they want to goof off, they have the day off, right? So they're pretty serious. So I have no problem with that. And the minimum wage, I presume that a number of ours are above the minimum wage. Are they not? Our judges that work full days and.
Well, it depends how you count it, but the way the state looked at this, and I think it was 3 counties that they identified as paying below the minimum wage, but that's assuming a 16-hour day at whatever the daily stipend is. So what about those judges who work longer into the evening, or what about
or
those
how
judges?
do you count the night before?
How do you count one day or training or?
Well,
Training
this is a
is a
special
different
case.
stipend.
That
Well, we
shouldn't even
do.
be
I mean, we count
categorized.
them now. I mean, we have a
I
fee
agree.
now that we're paying.
By statute, we have
Has
to
nothing
pay a
to do with
training
us.
fee.
A training fee, right?
$25.
But that's not minimum wage.
That's
And
definitely not.
No, that's definitely not, because I know the training takes a lot more. But I don't know. It would be interesting to know if the minimum wage applies to that. Do they mean it to apply to training as well as to election day work, or what? So we probably need a little more information on that part of it. But basically, I'm never opposed to paying minimum wage, which is always far below what it should be anyway.
Well, Margie did some real quick calculations. What chief judges would be outside the realm right now between their stipend and their training, but all the
doesn't
voting
include
operations judges would be for a 16-hour day. Is that 16?
No, for 20. I did 21 hours to include Monday night.
Oh, okay.
So it would be $210,
And we pay them $150.
and we pay them $150.
So it'd be $60 more.
So they
For
would be,
voting operations
they would be
judge.
getting $60 more.
That's
And
assuming we pay them for 3 hours on Monday.
We've been
but
trying
So
for
21
years
into
to
training.
get their pay increase. I don't see how we, go against this.
So are there motions or direction for us on these?
I think there's a lot of questions to be answered.
Mr. President, in the current form, I think we should oppose this. I don't see any good that can come of it. I think regarding the minimum wage, look, we should have a debate about what a proper stipend is based on what we think will attract good judges. This should be entirely outside the realm of employment law. It's a 1 day, 1.5 day engagement. It's a very special case. The same arguments for minimum wage for people who are, in a regular job earning a living. It's those kind of concerns are not at all present here, and we shouldn't make it that way.
What if we're changed to a stipend, a minimum stipend?
Well, I mean, that's not what his bill says now.
Right, we can suggest to him changes.
But I wonder if, why should we
address it at all?
Shouldn't we give the Board of Elections the maximum flexibility to deal with this as they see fit, and we're not setting maximums or minimums, because the demands to recruit people and get good people are going to drive that anyways. We don't need to dictate it.
Can we pay them whatever we want?
No. No.
If
you
We
did,
want the autonomy.
The county,
I
the
mean,
county
I guess
can.
you could, as long as
county
the
can, the
bottom
board-
line doesn't go above our budgeted amount.
Yeah.
I mean, the county gives us a budgeted amount for that line
So
item.
we can address as a local board what we pay these people.
Only if you can get
Yeah,
the county
but
to fund
we've
it.
never been able to get.
Yeah,
We raise
the
it every
budget.
single year. We're up there.
You see,
It's been 10
to-
years
rather
since
than
the
actually
stipends
tying
were
our
increased.
hands, I think that if
Yeah.
the state would require us to increase their pay, it would be a great thing. We've been trying to increase their pay.
Well, but isn't that going to force the hand of the county council?
Well, the county executive sets the budget.
My problem is that this affects every county, and some of the small counties might have a bigger problem than we do with what they're doing, or different problems.
A lot fewer judges.
I agree with Kevin. Alex, I mean.
All right, let's, do we want to take a position or vote on a position?
Well, Mr. President, I would move that we take a position opposing HB 73.
As it is now.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of opposing this, as it's written, this legislation, say aye.
Aye.
Opposing the opposition.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's
I guess.
3-2 to oppose. In
And
the present form.
it hasn't been scheduled for a hearing yet, but we'll work on testimony at such a point as that arrives.
Is testimony necessarily part of what the motion anticipates? Or
No, not necessarily.
Are we back to what we were discussing with the last bill as well?
Right. Like with the previous bill, what you
Well, I mean,
want us to do with
obviously,
that is the
I wasn't
next
part of the
layer
majority, so it's up to you all. But
Right.
I didn't know whether you all wanted to testify against it, or if you just wanted Allison to express her views to the sponsor, or.
Yeah, Allison.
Has Mayo taken a position?
Mayo hasn't considered it yet.
Well, can we, may I ask the board to, with the content of this vote, to represent the board's concerns in the Mayo vote, and she can report back to you once they take a position, and possibly when Delegate Lukey hears, maybe we already know that he's talking about splitting this bill anyway. Maybe there's some more information that will be had.
Well, my view is, in the present form, I oppose it.
Does the board accept the concept that Allison be directed to represent the board's concerns, but if the Mayo board to get further information from the Mayo board as well as Delegate Lukey, and pass it on to you, so the next board meeting you guys could revisit the issue?
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay.
That's fine.
Yeah, fine.
Okay. One more, House Bill 168. This is the one to
What
require.
did we do with 143? Did we just NA that one?
That's a technical bill.
Yeah. NA that.
House Bill 168 would require the following to go on signs and in the and in the sample ballot. The specimen ballot shall include notification of the forms of identification an individual may present to establish the individual's identity if the individual's right to vote is challenged at the polls. The notification shall be included in a block of text headlined, "Please read, important." And then the same requirement is for the informational materials to be posted in each polling place.
So it's basically to list what you need for ID.
No, not if what you need for ID, not for proof of residence,
Right.
but it's this one situation where your right to vote is challenged.
Your identity is challenged.
How often does that happen?
Like
Virtually never.
Yeah. We don't require ID.
When it does happen, who's allowed to challenge it, and what happens?
Poll watcher.
Under current
Poll
law?
watcher, and I'm drawing a blank on if it's ever happened. But I think the procedure is that the person only needs to fill out an affidavit saying they are who they are, and they get the vote.
Didn't it happen when that woman voted for her mother who died the day before the election? Did we caught her, and neighbors found her voting for her mother, herself and her mother?
No, she self-identified. She
Yeah.
self-reported
She came forward
herself.
and
Did
said-
she self-report
She came
her?
forward.
I thought her neighbor identified her.
No, she
Okay.
wrote.
Self-reported.
Leslie, did you want to say something?
For a challenge, if someone is challenged, it's the chief judge who would be asking the voter for ID if they thought this sounded valid.
But could somebody go to the chief judge and say, that's not who she's saying she is? I mean, how does...
Any registered voter can challenge another voter. So a judge could challenge someone that steps to their station. A voter in line could challenge someone. There are two categories of challengers: those that are accredited and those that are not. The accredited is the one that you were talking about earlier, that comes, sits behind the poll book, comes with their list, and is is really more observing, but they can challenge. The unaccredited is someone who walks in, who may be a campaigner or somebody who's standing in line, and I walk up and say, I'm Margaret Jurgensen, and they know that I'm not. Or someone who's outside, they see someone and they want to, rattle our chains, so they're going to come in and say, that person's not John Smith. And a lot of those are to hold up the process. We have them very rarely.
It's a Baltimore City.
But that's how it's laid out in the state regulations. The chief judge then has to adjudicate that process.
And then it prompts a provisional.
It just came out of Baltimore City.
Yes.
The chief judge's question is, are they voting a regular ballot or a provisional?
Right.
And if they vote a provisional and they lack the ID that this law would notify them of, they're still given the option to bring the ID to us to count the provisional, although I've never seen one.
Right.
Do we want to take a position on this one?
I don't, it doesn't affect us. I mean, we don't have any history with it. Yeah.
It's a Baltimore City issue.
Well, I don't know where it's an issue.
Well, that's easy.
Okay. So we've covered all the bills that were introduced up to this point. I know we've already taken up a lot of the time of the board meeting. I don't know how much, if you want to talk about those other 5 issues, if we are going to do something like go seek a sponsor to introduce a bill to allow you to count one ballot rather than rejecting both in the event of those provisional and absentee voters, or to restrict availability of the web delivery ballot, or if any one of those things is something this board wants to pursue. We don't have a bill. Mayo has not at this point gotten into a stance of seeking bills. A sponsor introduces something, then Mayo votes to support it or oppose it. Margaret and I can, and you all can, I'm sure, talk with individual sponsors about things, but in the absence of clarity from the board, I'm hesitant to go pursuing anything until I know that the board really wants us to.
I would want to have a paragraph or something that I sent to me to read, or a couple of people work with the staff. I need more than what we're talking about here.
Okay. What I will do is I suggest that Allison and several other staff people write up these concepts that we've talked about and forward them. Obviously, we can't, quite honestly, the time to introduce legislation is near past. So anything that we're going to do will have to happen next year. So if after you've had some time to discuss it, and if you can come to a decision on what the best remedy would be, maybe we can get Mayo to agree to it, and then we can move forward and Mako, and then of course the county can take a position on it, just as they did to get the 10th early voting center, or to get the student member of the board greater voting rights, and that it could be part of an overall legislative package. That's my recommendation.
That makes sense.
Well, when is the deadline to introduce bills? Do we know?
Well, they can introduce bills up until just about the last 30 days. But really and truly, I think the deadline to register or to introduce bills is, I think, realistically, it's passed.
Because it's a 90-day session, right?
Right.
They just came in,
I think middle of
April.
April.
A week ago.
Yeah, I don't think we're past it yet.
I don't think we're past it, but
the other problem is I want to know on any of these things that we're working on, are we going to run into a time difficulty on the other next year? With being too close to the election, which would be in June. I'd be happy as a board member to work with staff.
I would too.
On putting something
well,
together.
Allison would be happy to work with both of you.
Okay.
Okay. Good. All right.
So Kevin's report?
Other than Tom Moore's appeal was officially dismissed for lack of prosecution, I don't have anything else to report. We have no pending litigation.
Yay.
Sure, let me ask you something.
That's a good report right there.
I've been to a few state board meetings, and I think they open up where they ask all the state board members if they've made any contributions.
They end the board meetings that way. They go around the table. That's something that just started, I want to say last year, I believe. Whether it's only in presidential years, I don't know. But I think it's with this new board. That's when it started. They go around, and each member says during that month's period of time what political contributions they made.
I raised that because I know we're all active in politics. That's why we're sitting at this table. And, I know that I'm going to have 6 to 10, maybe more friends who are running for office. And, I just we got to be as transparent as possible. The governor's running, which I certainly will support openly. I mean, within the bounds of our rules. So what do you suggest, Kevin, in terms of how we can make contributions if we can? I mean, my wife makes 14 contributions. That's me. I mean, let's be realistic.
Yeah, but we don't all have wives or husbands.
But I'm just saying, I'm going to have a lot of people that I want to support.
And what about parties? Was there a difference between a PAC, a party, and a person?
I just want to say, I mean, if I contribute X dollars to John Doe running for the county council, I want to be as transparent and throw this out for further discussion next month, maybe.
Why don't we do that? There's no requirement. The state board does it, and they've obviously adopted a policy of doing it, but I'm unaware of any requirement that would require you at a meeting to go ahead and articulate who you've contributed money to.
Well, in fact, our bylaws don't speak, we looked at and revised our bylaws for political activities, if you will.
To allow it.
What's allowed and not allowed. Yeah. Making contributions is allowable, just like it is under the Hatch Act. You can always give money. You might not be able to, put a sign or do this or do that. But I admire what the state board does. I think, it's open to all the public to know, people's political contributions, but
especially
it's not anything that we've spoken to in the past.
Just a thought.
Sure.
Because I'm sure we're all going to know many candidates, especially with the 4 county council seats that are open. We're all going to know a ton of people running for everything.
Okay, I'll be prepared to report on that next month. I don't know any other local board does it. I think it's
but when I went to state board
practice.
meetings, they do that.
I'd be interested to hear what the rationale was because I don't think they used to do that.
No, they did. It's new with this board, and it doesn't seem to have any dollar limit either. I've heard
that was my question. Did they say over $500 or something?
Some are as small as like $25.
Did they say the candidate the exact amount?
They say the candidate or the committee. Sometimes it's the name of a committee and the amount.
Okay.
I would have concerns about assuming that a spouse's contributions is attributable to you, because
there might be an inference.
I know while someone might make that inference, I know that my spouse makes up her own money.
But
money. Yeah, I make her own money. Yeah, exactly.
Well, we had this issue, not to get sidetracked, but in terms of hosting events. I mean, you have a house, but maybe you're not the one hosting the event. Maybe your wife would be the one hosting the event.
Or husband.
Or husband or whatever. And is it really fair to the spouse to limit their ability to host parties or political events simply because you decided you want to be on the Board of Elections? So I mean, there's another side of that coin.
We did talk about it at the beginning of the last term. There is a perception issue, though, that, Jim, I know you're sensitive to, which is why you brought it up today. But I mean, there is a perception issue that I've been very sensitive to as well. That even though you're giving them money, so it's not like they've bought your assistance in any way, but it does look more like an inside job if we are actively supporting candidates and counting their ballots. So.
Okay.
So
next.
Old business?
Old business, Allison and Leslie, election judge and recruitment.
Jim,
I believe David Naiman had brought this issue up and wanted it for purposes of discussion.
Yeah, this is in advance of the actual staff report, lessons learned from the election, which we're not ready to give that yet, but there were a couple of discussions that were pushed off to January about election judge recruiting and training.
Well, what I had asked to talk about in particular was really anything we could do to increase the number of judges and also to make it more convenient for those who express interest in being a judge, whether it's more opportunity to have shifts that are not the entire day but that are half the day, which, an 8-hour day instead of a 16-hour day. I'm also very interested in whether we can offer people greater flexibility in terms of scheduling their training. Because as it stands now, there are occasions where people are offered only a limited choice of training times when there are actually where there could be more times available. My thought is that everything we do, it kind of depends on our having a sufficient number of judges, and that this particular election that's upcoming, the gubernatorial primary in late June, is going to be among the most difficult for getting judges, and that we want to make it as easy as possible. If someone expresses enough interest to go onto our website, take our test, and pass it, I wouldn't want them to not get trained because the training options don't work for them. And I think we could get a lot more people to participate. I think that the 16-hour day, not to mention the few hours the night before, is a major deterrent to people being involved. We have a lot of great people who are willing to do it, and God bless them that they're willing to do it. And obviously, all the members of the board are having that long day every election day. But I think we'd have a lot more people who would be willing to do it if they were able to structure it somewhat differently.
I don't think
So-
anybody would disagree with that.
I guess I'm not sure if there are specific things that you want the staff to talk about right now, or if you want us to just make sure in the
Come up
staff
with
lessons learned report and
We can
to
address these
address these
topics
questions.
When is the lessons
next
learned?
month.
Next month, yeah. that's
Okay.
Right.
That's fine.
Okay.
Is next month is
Yeah.
February?
Scheduled for February.
Yes.
Yeah.
February next month.
Address them how?
As part of the lessons learned. Just as you received
Topics
your
to cover.
packet for voting services, the wrap up for 2016, every election we give you a wrap up of the election judge, their performance, compliance with the law. We can address it in that part of the meeting.
But these are issues that are currently not taking place. In other words, you're not going to have anything in that presentation.
Well, we'll
that,
have.
that shows,
We can
people
tell you how
working
many.
an 8-hour day.
We can give you information about the number of judges that we had serving part-time positions. We had part-time judges in the last election.
Right.
We can pull that information for you.
Right, and that would be useful to have. I think what we also would want is any pros and cons that you see of making that more widely available. Because I think now, well, I don't know what your numbers are, but my impression is that that's more the exception than the rule. And certainly we want to know if we were to make much greater use of it, what the ramifications of that are. That and also I'm really very interested in how that training is scheduled, because I know that I've heard from people who found that they had very limited choices and were not happy about it.
So aside from the sort of post-mortem of the lessons learned piece, discussions of some of these forward-thinking things and both the why we do it the way we do it and our thoughts on pros and cons of changing that with the shifts, with the degree of flexibility that is given to election judges in scheduling their training.
Anything else that you can think of that would help us to recruit judges?
Okay.
I mean, obviously, increasing their pay is on the list, but I'm sure that there's, the pay is not so high that that's really the biggest factor for most of our judges anyway.
But correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of the flexibility that you spoke to in terms of schedule of election judges, I know you've got the morning, people, you have people early morning, you have the closers at night, but the overwhelming majority of people are expected to be there from 6 in the morning until the polls close. Is that not correct?
I'm not going to answer that question right this very second. I'm going to let Leslie and her team describe to you the part-time election judge has been around since Sue Bratton was the chairman of this board. And we have been adding part-time judges, but I know that one of the things that happened as I was going out the door on December 16th was we discovered that our chief judges, in their zeal to make sure that everything was going to run perfectly, judges that we hired to work part-time, half a day, were asked to stay the whole day, and there was no information passed on to us, and so we did not, and I don't know how many judges were impacted, maybe just a dozen or so, but that was not the information. Our information showed that John Smith worked a part-time day, that's what he was paid, he gets his check, he ended up working all day, and people make decisions that say, we have this big line, you have to stay until 8 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night, when in fact, if we knew what was going on because the chief had called us, we might be able to do something that is not, maybe there is a need, but then we could make adjustments so that we don't have to cut 2-3 checks to these people. So I would like for Leslie and Allison to have an opportunity to talk about part-time judges and how we handle them.
Thank you.
It's a communication problem there between our staff and the judges.
Can be.
Okay, if there's nothing else, David, is it?
No,
okay.
That was it. Thank you.
Tacoma Park has been covered. Board member discussion of the canvas.
That was you.
I know Mary Ann wanted to discuss that.
Well, aren't we going,
do you want to talk about it then, with the part of the voter services as part of the canvas?
Well, I know there's a whole report on the canvas here that's very detailed and very good. I mean, I appreciated having it. Well, but my problem is not addressed in there, so I will raise it. That is that it just appeared, it was more than appearance, but when I got here the first day of the canvas, things were very disorganized, I would say. And then it followed on subsequent days as well. We were late getting started. We had a tremendous number of the workers who for the canvas, and people were sitting around for over an hour on the first day, and I presume being paid for that, and with no work to do. I was shocked because I've been through, this was my 6th election, and I've not seen anything like it before. I mean, it's always been, very orderly, and everything functioned right on time. So I'd be interested to know what caused the problem and what continued to cause it in future days. Also, I saw that there were times when people would be finished, a whole group of people, basically a room at one time, I think, where everybody was finished, and but we were told there was more work to be done, but quite a bit of time appeared before we were told that someone, a staff person, had to come in and verify the fact that, yes, this task is finished before the next could begin. So I sort of was observing a lot of different chiefs, if you will, that, we're getting into a picture that heretofore hadn't been the case. I mean, we have a couple of staff people, one in particular, Michelle, who was just outstanding in the area of the canvas. I mean, she knows this like the back of her hand, and in the past has handled all the various rooms that we had. But I'm being very, very blunt about this, but it did concern me that it just was very discombobulated, and hopefully maybe you've learned lessons from this and things that can be applied going forward. But I think we'd all be interested in knowing, what your feeling is in terms of what went wrong.
Well, I think the first day, I don't disagree that it was disorganized. We were introducing the number of paper ballots that we were about to process was a number that had not been seen since 2008. Additionally, nearly 20,000 of these were ballots that had to be duplicated. In the past, we just assembled downstairs, and it was only in this last election that we had duplication occurring upstairs, running 2 rooms between 2 floors, which was a pretty big challenge. There's some recommendations that staff has made. We haven't had a huge chance to talk about how we're going to do or recommend the canvas in the future, but I do think that for reducing the packets to approximately 50 ballots per packet for all of the, whether it was the regular old-fashioned absentee process or whether it was this duplicate process, definitely built in greater accountability and certainly helped us as we move forward to audit an accountability process. If I were to, and I haven't had a chance to sit down with the entire staff, but one of my recommendations in the future is to go back to the days when we would convene the board at 10 o'clock and then recess immediately so that we can, because that's part of the problem, is we're looking for this multiple voter report and trying to pull where we have one person and has a record of 2 votes. Now, it was fewer of these than they were, well, that's not really true. Some of the issues that created the big problems in the primary, because we did a lot of different training, resolved, but the 19th, and if we had to do it all over, I would have the duplication, have the election judges come in at 11 o'clock in the morning, maybe 12 o'clock, go through the PowerPoint presentation that Michelle and Jessica put together so that they understand what they're going to do. And I also believe that there was some confusion with some of the longtime temporaries with regards to how we were handing out these packets, and we need to make sure that they have a better understanding of what they were going to do. They were first-time mistakes for a process that they were first-time mistakes. I agree it was disorganized. I would disagree with you in the sense that afterwards, the staff at 10 o'clock in the morning knew exactly who was reporting. They knew the team members that they were putting together. We were able to sort out those individuals that were Canvas team members that were not very effective or extremely slow, whichever way you want to put it. I know Jim was standing with me when I went and tracked down 3 people who there was a little bit of a shouting match in the hallway when I informed them that they could not come back because they weren't helping us to try to complete our canvas. And then with regards to doing the projection as to when
And we also had the problem of me having to be in two places at once, Michelle having to be in two places at once, and Janet having to be in two places at once. And that was because the ES&S 850 went down. Michelle, because she needed to try to manage both floors here. Me, because the 850 just wasn't going to work. And Janet was trying to make sure that the spreadsheets that we were running, and then the unexpected 850 problem, which took us to at least a day and a half to resolve. So, and I will tell you that we had a preliminary meeting with ES&S and the state board, more ES&S to talk about the 850. I unfortunately had to have a little bit of surgery the morning they met, but Allison went. Lisa was there. Jerry was there. We brought one of our temporaries that was in the room when everything was at its worst point. And I will tell you also that my recommendation is that we will never, ever approach doing an absentee canvass or a provisional canvass with not less than 2 and more likely 3 high-speed scanners. Because
3 high-speed
scanners. There was just, that was my mistake. I never, everything went so smoothly in the primary with that high-speed scanner. And the mistakes and the problems that we had, I came from a high-speed scanner county. We never had that kind of problem, but when I thought about it after the fact, when I had time to think about it, I never had less than 5 scanners. And I had a county that was 250,000 people. You have a county of, 370,000? And she always had multiple scanners. So that was a mistake that we made that we'll never make again. I don't care what it costs, we will always have, not for the primary, for the general, the primary of gubernatorial, we'll always have 2 scanners. For the general, 3, and you might even have a 4th one sitting in reserve at the ES&S warehouse. But and so when that happened, the staff was constantly playing catch up. In the past, we were able to, in the primary, we tried to stay current. So if a packet would come down in a precinct number, so 0101, and there were 46 ballots, that was recorded on the smart sheet, and then it went over to the scanner. And it went pretty well that way. This way, because all these ballots, first of all, the ballots that were run, they were not recording correctly because they kept jamming up. So we started over twice, and then when they brought the second scanner, we zeroed everything out, and on Saturday, it was a Friday afternoon really, we started all over again. We zeroed everything out and started scanning. And the problem with the folding ballots, even though we followed the latest and greatest directions that the state gave us, were still not functioning right. And if it weren't for the fact that Will Wall, is that right? Mm-hmm. Who is a professional photographer, he's the guy that does the video for you, he shot photographs, and so he had a framing piece of equipment, and he was literally ironing all the ballots before they would even get to the scanning room. So we had all these layers of problems.
I can understand how
but
that situation impacted the others.
I will say that we learned that in the beginning, on the first day, the only thing that you guys will do is convene at 10 o'clock. Our recommendation will be convene at 10 o'clock and allow the staff to pull all of the voter records that we need, just as we did in the past. So, and we're not probably, the staff is strongly recommending that there will be only one room for duplicating. I'm not, in my head, convinced that that's the way to go,
But part of it is the reality of there's just not any room in the parking lot. There were lots of logistical issues, and I would just say that I would hope that when we get done with going through all of our lessons learned, by April we can present to you a concept of how the Canvas should go in the future, so that I'm well aware that at least 3 of you are attorneys who have jobs that you have to do and taking out all of these days. And I'm well aware that 2 of you work on the concept of billable hours. But you and Nahid also have your specific duties and your jobs that we're going to try to master your time a little more efficiently. I also am going to tell you that I have told Kevin that I really hope that he continues to lobby Jeff Dorsey to change the regs with regards to whether or not, when your staff, the Canvas staff, is just duplicating ballots and just duplicating, why is there a need for a quorum here if we're not going to make any decisions? If there's an issue of voter intent, set it aside and have the board come back for 2 hours and go through all the voter intent stuff. It's just not an effective use of your time. You might as well be sitting there. I mean, it's just not an effective use of your time.
Well, I certainly didn't raise it as complaining about my time, and, you know, this past election I had more time than I ever had available before to make easily available, and I was happy to do it. What was frustrating was that very often I couldn't get things to do. I mean, it's like, come on, treat it when we're there, treat us like extra hands to do the work that you've got to have done. You know, we know how to do it just as well as, you know, everybody else. And, you know, so that part of it doesn't bother me at all. But I think the fact that whether you have 1, 2, or 3 rooms, what I would suggest, especially with 3, obviously you can't have yourself tied up in any one of those rooms, Margaret. If you're free and you can come by, that's great. But there are a million other things going on, not the least of which is the scanning, and you've got to be free to roam. But you need Michelle and 2 other people like her that are in charge of a single area, and that are hands-on in that area, it seems to me, the whole time. And for however many areas you're going to utilize.
Okay.
But I don't mean to take up. It's getting late, and I know you want to get through the rest of this. Thank you.
Okay. Jessica. We did arrange for the report to get to you. I know that, you know, it was kind of a busy weekend for some. So, but I've told Jessica to put together a PowerPoint to highlight the content of the report.
2 minutes.
We also,
Can we take a break?
and if there's any follow-up questions, if you could hold them until she gets done with her presentation, it would be helpful.
Okay.
Oh, dark.
Will you get one?
We're going to run down through the numbers that kind of made up the collection, some of it for the entire year, cycle, and to highlight and illustrate a few points from the general, and then any questions, of course, you're going to have for any of it.
Jessica, could you speak up a little,
Sure.
please?
So this is the voter services for the 2016 presidential election cycle. The focus areas are, of course, voter registration, absentee, and canvass. We use 38 full-time, part-time, and temporary employees in the office during the course of the general election, which is the same number that we used in the primary. And then we also used 174 Canvas team members to make up to 50 teams each day during the Canvas. As of today, we have 717,928 registered voters. That is after the inactive removal that Barbara spoke about earlier. Here are some of the transactions that were processed. I would highlight that 7,494 voters who were previously inactive were reactivated during this election. And then that was the inactive cancellations we talked about, which are removed from that number. Between July 1 and the end of the year, 283,000 voter records were created or updated. 94,000 of those were electronic voter records. This is some information about registration by our 16 and 17-year-old age group. I knew there was a question about these specific numbers. So as you can see, overwhelmingly 91%, which accounted for 7,643 of our 16 and 17-year-olds were actually registered at the Motor Vehicle Administration.
What time frame is
This is actually all of our well, according to the current law, all voters who are 16 and 17 are considered active voters, even though they're ineligible to participate in the election until they will be 18 by the general. So these are what the snapshot is as of last week of all 16 and 17-year-olds who are active and have been turned 18 in be voters. I'll let Dr. Z come and give you the high school rundown.
So there's a breakdown with our efforts, not only with our staff voter registration with MCPS, but also via future votes. So I split those two columns by the source of the high school, and also whether it was the primary and or the general. So you have the totals. It was a very fruitful effort. Our goal also is to return to the schools before the end of the school year. So we're going to continue recruiting. It's a great resource. Some schools were more active than others. So we're still working with all of these schools. And this chart will actually be shared with our future vote lead in each school to talk to their conduit, just to show them to maybe make it a competitive spirit to get some of the high schools with lower numbers higher. And then those are the breakdowns on how many of the students we recruited during the future vote drives and those that we recruited to serve at the election.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I'm looking at Albert Einstein there at the top, where there's a 0.
Yes.
That means that there was not a registration drive per se.
Yes. It could be there wasn't a registration drive, or they weren't able to coordinate, or if they did, they didn't get any voter registration. One of the challenges, depending, so if you look at Einstein, when they did the voter registration drive with MCPS, it could have been that they did not do the training. We had these training sessions in the Carper Center, but when we went via future vote, we did 53 for the primary and then 19 for the general. Also keep in mind the numbers were less for the general because a lot of the seniors left, but then at the same time we did a different type of campaign where we did posters and we did more online registrations.
Dr. Z, what's the difference between the 0 at Einstein and the whatever it is, 107 at Clarksburg? Is there something you can pinpoint in each high school, a person, a counselor, a vice principal, or whatever that makes the difference?
Yes, it's a mixed bag. It could be a very passionate NSL AP history teacher.
But there's nothing there's not one thing you go after.
Exactly. Every school's different.
But you still have more than half of the high schools have 0s in that left column.
Yes. Yes.
I mean,
and that was, and we met with Miss the contact from the school system about that, and they're going to be working with it. We've asked if we could join them in their gatherings, but they tend to keep they want to meet first with the administrators because some of them are with SMOB, some of them would enable to contact from the history department. It's not a full kind of, each school does their own thing. It's not a one shoe fit all with the school system. So you see Einstein,
yeah, that seems to be part of the problem.
And Damascus, yeah, they run their ships differently. But nonetheless, with Future Vote, we're still going to continue working with our Future Vote contact. A lot of our seniors are leaving, so we have identified a junior or sophomore. Then next year they fall into 16, 17-year-olds.
A lot of these kids are getting registered at MVA too when they're getting their permits.
Yeah, the
So
majority of them get their learner's permit.
when they're going up, they're registering. That's what happened with my daughter. I didn't get the benefit to register her myself. She did it at MVA.
Right. But how many 16 and 17-year-olds are there in Montgomery County? And I'm willing to venture that there's way more than 8,000.
Yeah, and in any given time, there are approximately around 9,500 to 10,000 students graduating every year.
Right.
So depending on the enrollment of that particular school, it will fluctuate. But yes, but the goal would be specifically for this year, looking forward for the primary gubernatorial. We're going to go back before the end of the school year and go back in the fall. Independent what they do with MCPS, the first column. Future will still have a presence. We still have our ambassadors, and we still have an inroads. So that's going to continue. What occurs at first column, that's really up to the school system, how robust they want their presence and how they want to work with their students.
All right. Thank you, Humberto.
Thank you.
Okay. Just some other registration activities happened throughout the year. And then this goes statistics back up into the call center data. These are the number of calls and broke down by category that were processed during the general election. We peaked with 660 phone calls on the Monday before the election. That was the most single day process. And I know Margie will give you a much more in-depth breakdown than mine in her presentation, but this is just provisional ballots processed. We received 12,757 provisionals, 11,000 were counted, about 1,400 were rejected, which resulted in about an 80% of the provisional ballots overall were counted. Of those 1,477 that were not counted, 1,056 of those voters went on election day and were not registered to vote. The good news, though, is 1,530 voters used same-day registration to register for the first time during early voting for the general election. So those voters would have otherwise been provisional voters that would not have counted without same-day registration. But I do want to point out that in my report I discussed some issues with actually processing the same-day registrants to be able to actually vote at the polls during early voting. Only 425 voters either possess the proper documentation or were determined by the state's pre-qualification system to be pre-qualified. So an overwhelming majority of voters, even if they had the proper and appear to otherwise be eligible to do same-day registration, ended up voting provisional.
Was that largely because they weren't on the state list?
Yes, and I called and had some conversations with the state about the matching process, and it's the algorithm they use is largely like we talked about with the ERIC. They start looking at it, they decide this looks weird and that looks weird, and they start just tossing categorical amounts of people out of the pre-qualification, and so that resulted in first a whole lot of phone calls and trying to determine what was happening. We did count, I'd say 98% of those ballots, the voters had brought proper information with them to count, so we had no issue with counting them on the backside, but it did create that additional layer of work and frustration for the voters. But it did.
This may be something the board wishes to write the state board staff on. I mean, this pre-qualification I thought was supposed to, most of these people should be able to get registered and vote. I mean, the provisional ballot counts, but I mean these are new voters that are going through a process that those numbers are not very good for something that's supposed to pre-qualify the vast majority of these people.
That's shockingly bad, yeah.
And of course, we have no back-end explanation as for why the system kicked them out, and we don't provide or conduct any secondary, evaluation of them. If they have the proper information in place, we put them through the system like any other voter. So we don't, have a rhyme or reason why they weren't put through. And it's supposed to be a streamlining process that ensures that, we're not registering people multiple times or anything unusual. But it was much higher than even the primary, even though we had a much lower number of voters who actually took and used the actual process during early voting. We mailed out 62,398 absentee ballots. Ballots returned, 51,445, 527 federal write-in ballots.
When you say we mailed out, is that the state mailing them
That
out?
includes, that was for Redback. And then the last week of the election, we mailed from here at the office.
Do we have data, or maybe you're about to show us, of the return rate based on how people requested their ballot?
On how people what, David?
On how they requested their
Oh,
ballot.
okay.
So in other words,
Okay,
the
got it.
electronic
I think
request
you do.
versus the mail request, or I'm just curious as to whether there's any patterns that we
Jessica, I think you do a little bit further.
So, overall return rate, 82%. This is the statistics on the ballots that were duplicated. So, not, I think, driving exactly to the number, but this is the delivery method they chose. We had 19,133 voters. I didn't put the slide in for the general, but I did in the primary, the same kind of calculation you're talking about, and it was very similar. We do have a less of a return rate by about 15% of web delivery ballots that are returned versus voters who receive their ballot by mail.
Yeah, if we could get that, that would be great.
And I'll do a breakdown to you. I'll see if we can get from the state their number of interactions with their system. This is to really point out, though, what we've been talking about all along is that the difficulty in duplicating ballots and what it takes. This is, the duplicating. The next slide is going to be the ballots that we canvass for mail-in and the comparison piece. So mail delivery, 31,000 ballots, about $18,000 in what we paid labor hours for the canvass teams. So when you look at this as a comparison, we received back over 30,000 mail delivery ballots with a processing cost of under $20,000. In comparison, we got back less than 20,000 web delivery with over $35,000 worth of processing costs. And that equates to a difference of about 3 times more per ballot processing cost for a ballot that we've received that has to be duplicated than our ballots that we received that we've been sent out by mail.
And that basically is all about duplication.
It is. It's all the duplicating piece that complicates it. So that's the numbers that kind of go with the report that was prepared for you guys. Do you have questions about the numbers, the reports, the processes?
Great.
Thank you.
Jessica, can you send us this report electronically, or?
Sure.
Yeah.
It is included in this, but
Oh, is
the
it?
Yeah,
numbers,
it's in the write-up.
but we can give you the statistics, and then we'll include David's request
Yeah,
for
I
those
have the
numbers.
Do you have any demographic information as to who requests what? For example, if we were to assume that younger people are the ones who are requesting online, do we have any data to support or not support that?
Yes, I can drill down to that, and I'll leave it for you at a high level.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
And that's it. Next month. Oh yes, yes. Margie has something she needs to inform you.
Well, I want to do 2 things. I'll do one before the other. I sent out an email on Friday regarding parking here at the BOE. And Margaret and I honestly can't remember whether we actually shared a lot of detail with you all, so I'm just going to take a couple minutes. We are sharing our training rooms on this level of the building with the Department of Health and Human Services through April to allow them to conduct some training of all of their staff on a new software system that they're implementing. And so the result of that is that parking is going to be potentially crazier than during election judge training, because they have 2 classrooms, if they're filled, at 30 people each, both in the morning and the afternoon. So for February, March, and April, we will again put out the reserved parking in the back of the building for you all, and we have coded your badges, as you discovered today, so that you can get in the back door and come in. So
You had a little man there for us today that I love that little man.
just in case the badges didn't work, but Mr. Chapman will not be there every month.
He's adorable.
So, but
It was very convenient today with the pouring down.
so I just wanted to give you a little bit more information on that. We're also sharing part of the flex room, our call center, with the volunteer center, who is having their space renovated, and so there's 5 or 6 individuals in there every day during the day. So,
Are we receiving funds for this?
No, we are not.
Yeah,
What?
they built this building.
They're receiving goodwill.
The county,
Yeah.
part of the agreement for the county to do this facility is that the county gets to use the training rooms when we're not using
Whenever they want.
Well, as long as we're not.
Not when we're.
But this is the first time it's
This is the
happened.
first
First
time
time
since
in
2009.
8 years.
But they're not sharing the rent with us.
No, they're not sharing the rent. They
They
are
pay the
sharing the
rent.
cost of additional custodial services. So anyway, this is the first time. This is the actual first day that it went into effect.
Oh,
so
really?
I just wanted to let you all know why I had sent that email and to ask you to please try to park in the
nice.
back.
Please try to be nice.
To make it easier on you all as well as on everybody else. And then the next thing on the agenda, I'll just kind of segue into is the future meetings. And what we don't have on there is the Mayo conference in June. This is not a biennial, so it is not a requirement. It's not mandated for the board. But just for your information, it's being held June 6th through 9th in Ocean City. And when we get more information on it, we'll certainly send that out. But I wanted to just get that information to you at this point.
I thought this year it would be.
This year
it is mandatory.
Last year was the big
2016
one
was
we
not,
didn't
but
attend.
2015
Yeah,
was.
this year it's mandatory.
The state board has decided to hold its biennial meeting that you all are required to go to in Annapolis on a different date. I don't remember what that date is. I think it's in October.
Of this year, 17?
Yes.
That's not enough.
So this meeting is not being held in conjunction with the state board's biennial meeting. Their biennial meeting will be a one-day affair in Annapolis. This is
So they're changing
optional.
it, in other words.
So we're not going to the
Don't
beach.
say this isn't the year that,
You-
because it is the year
You
that.
may, and there are breakout sessions that are explicitly for the board members, but it's
We're
not
gonna get the
mandated. It's like
agenda.
the every
Oh,
other
we
year.
got the agenda? Okay.
This is a preliminary agenda, actually.
And this is in Annapolis?
No, this is Ocean City.
Hilberto, you went to the board meeting today. Did they circulate an agenda that was at all updated from the one that Brittany circulated the last one? Okay, what I'm circulating is the agenda as of last week. It was voted on. The preliminary agenda was approved by the Mayo board this morning. So I think this is as close as final as it gets. There's some tweaking will occur. For example, I know the attorneys want to have a breakout, and that is not currently listed on this, but there is at least an outline of an agenda that has been signed off on.
I see it's a board member breakout.
Yeah, they have a couple of board member breakouts.
Yeah.
But we're not, we don't have to
You're
be
not
there.
required to go to them. But should you wish to, you and your peers may share a room.
On
To
ourselves.
talk about
I'd rather share a
whatever.
room with-
I forget I forget. Do you remember what the topics were that they were queuing up for the board members? I don't remember.
Once
Brittany-
we get something a little bit more developed on day 2, we'll make sure you get it.
That's Thursday.
Yeah.
Do we have money budgeted for this?
We didn't take it away like we did last year.
That's my question.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
I mean, these things are, the sessions are often very helpful, but it's also a question of networking. And, with other board members, etc. So the fact that we didn't go last year, and we didn't send anybody last year.
Yes, there is money set aside.
Yeah, there's $2,000 set aside for the conference.
But if we pay for our own, it's tax deductible, right?
That would be between you and the tax.
Well, there seems to be,
This, honestly, Margaret and I talked about this morning. She asked me to just make you aware of the dates until we got more information. And, I was not aware that Allison was distributing that this afternoon. But, as we get more detailed information, we'll get it to you. And we certainly, as it's appropriate and requested, we'll make arrangements.
As it's appropriate.
And request
yeah,
it.
and that October date, if we know, when
Yes.
the one for the mandatory meeting would be very helpful
Well,
to know
well,
whenever they.
yeah, when
I
we
understand.
get it.
I didn't know anything about that, so.
I understand. Whenever we know what that date is, the earlier the better.
Absolutely.
Which was that?
Is there anything else under future meetings that,
Not now.
So the next meeting is February 27th at 2:30.
Do I have a motion to adjourn? Second?
Absentee.
Second.
Oh,
What?
sorry.
Oh, what happened?
What?
oh,
We
but
have
they,
to have the Board of Canvassers. Don't run out of here.
so we need to, we do
Good
need to
God.
adjourn the regular
Look at
session.
Well, do we have a
We need
motion?
to answer your question. It's at the Clarion.
So we have to come back to the Board
Sorry,
of Elections?
we
or
need
no?
to adjourn, we can close this meeting and then go into.
Oh, all those
Board
in favor of
Canvassers.
adjourning the Board of Elections meeting? Aye. No one opposed?
Did you get the, who made the
No.
motion?
So now we
I
have...
made the motion. I don't know who seconded.
Who
Who's
seconded the
Mary Ann
motion?
second.
Mary Ann
Mary Ann.
seconded.
So unanimous. All right, now we have to convene as a Board of Canvassers?
Yeah, I
All
moved.
right, we have a quorum.
Hold on.